Once you start the ritual, make sure you know how to end it. I've been stuck in my apartment for 10 days straight. Think? I wasn't really sure. It was hard to remember anything since I started the ritual. I didn't sleep much and the food went bad days ago, but leaving was not an option. Not if I wanted to save Maddie. One more night. That's all it would take. Home. Now, Maddie's my twin brother. He was the good one, you know. He'd always been the golden boy. Smart, considerate, loved by everyone. He even got a full scholarship to college. It was like someone split up the good and bad parts of a person when Maddie and I were born. Me? I've always been on the wrong side of everything. Jobs, the law, you name it. Maddie was the only one who never stopped believing in me. I never meant for it to turn out that way. I just didn't think things through. But I didn't care about any of that. What mattered was that I couldn't just watch him die, not when there was something I could do about it. I found this book, you see. I was in this old second-hand bookstore to get something to cheer my brother up. Maddie loved the pulpy crime thrillers that were on clearance. He could tear through a stack of those in a week, probably because he couldn't do much else from a hospital bed. But that was where I found it. A book called The Gospel of Worms. A skinny leather-bound thing that smelled like mold. It was shoved under a pile of murder mysteries like it was waiting for me to find it. Though calling it a book was an understatement, it was all handwritten. Every inch of it was covered in notes and scribbles. A few of the pages had whole sections crossed out in red ink, and the pictures looked like they were printed out and glued on. But it said it could give someone control over life, sickness, and even death. I thought it was a joke at first, or maybe I was just curious. I can't remember anymore. My memory hasn't been the same since I found it. All I remember was I started reading, and I couldn't stop. I stayed in my apartment until I missed visiting hours. I didn't get to bring Maddie his books that day. I felt awful when I noticed the time, but the nurse told me they had to give him an emergency dose of meds that afternoon, so he was knocked out most of the day. Anyway, I dropped by the hospital the next morning. Maddie was still asleep, but I wanted to drop his books off so he had something nice to wake up to. I placed the stack on the table. Then I gave his hand a squeeze. His eyes opened instantly, and he smiled at me. "Wow, thanks, Mikey. That's enough to last me a lifetime," he said. I gripped his hand tighter. "Hey man, don't joke like that. You're going to live long enough to see every one of these guys retire," I said. "I bet their publishers would still put out the books even after they die," he started. "I'm pretty sure that James Patterson is going to be on the New York Times bestsellers list until Judgment Day," Maddie said, struggling to say every word. But he'd always been the type to commit to a punchline. "Look, Maddie, I think I found a way to help you, but I'll have to go away for a while, okay? 2 weeks, maybe 3 tops. So you got to promise me that you'll still..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "You don't have to do that, Mikey. I told you I'm fine with what's coming. I've lived a good life, and I've got a brother who brings me a whole library every week. I finally feel like I have all the time in the world." "No," he said. "You're 24, for God's sake, all right? Don't talk like that. You're going to get more time," I said with more force than I intended. I could see he wanted to argue some more, but he struggled to even keep his eyes open, so he just nodded. And he asked me to read to him. I did. Then I stayed until he went back to sleep, and then I headed straight to Walmart. The book was clear on this. Once the ritual began, I couldn't leave until it was done. I wasn't supposed to have any contact with the outside world either, and the whole process. It was supposed to last for weeks, but other than that, it was pretty simple. Follow the steps, say the words, and he'd get better. Just 6 simple steps is all it would take. I filled my cart with enough supplies for a month just to be safe. After getting that done, it was time to hunt down the things I needed for the healing ritual itself, and those weren't something you could find in a grocery store. I had to go to the dark web for him. I spent hours on a bunch of different forums. Soon enough, I got invited to a couple of private chat groups. It was there that I found my leads. You'd be surprised what people were willing to do for the right price. There was a whole underground market for occult objects and services. Rare herbs, hard to find bones, animal parts. There were even things like unicorn hair, mermaid eggs, and angel feathers. I spent days going through listings and putting up ads. Most nights, I was up way past midnight setting up meetings. By the fifth day, I got a call from my boss at the garage I worked at. Didn't even ask me if I was okay. Just told me not to bother showing my face there again. Didn't matter much to me, though. I had bigger things on my plate. Then, after a week, I found my suppliers. I met a prison guard who wanted to get paid in crypto. He said that harvesting what I wanted wouldn't be easy. And then there was a kid who worked at a funeral home. He didn't charge me much. He was new to the occult scene, so he just wanted me to spread the word about his services. The most surprising contact of all was a suburban mom who made custom ritual tools in her basement. No questions asked. And then just when I got everything I needed, Mom called. She was pissed at me for worrying Maddie. I told her I was in the middle of trying to save his life. She hung up on me after that. But again, I didn't really care. I went through my checklist one last time. I paid the rent in advance to make sure no one else bothered me, and then I locked the door. Now, before I can actually do the ritual, I still have a few more things I need to do. The book said I had to make sure my place was sealed off and I was purified. I opened up the first bag of salt. I needed to make sure my entire apartment was lined with it. Every room, window, every doorway. I went through 10 bags of the stuff by the time I was done. I made sure to go over each line twice so there wouldn't be any gaps. This was the only way to keep any unwanted spirits from interfering with the ritual. Once that was done, it was time to prepare myself. The book said I needed to be of pure body and mind for it to work. That first part was pretty straightforward. It just meant no eating during the purification phase. No food, just water. But the part about cleansing the mind, it was a bit trickier. Every night at midnight, I had to face east and light a candle in front of me. Then I had to stare at the fire and focus my mind on what I wanted the most in the world, the thing that had driven me to do this ritual. The gospel said this cleansing phase. It had to be done for 3 days. The first day was the hardest. I spent the entire day trying to ignore my hunger. By evening, my hands were shaking. I could barely hold the match steady. Then I sat on the floor and I stared at the light. I imagined Maddie healthy again. I thought about going out with him for drinks and listening to his dumb jokes. I pictured him working at the D office and reviewing a case and finally being the best man at his wedding. I forgot about all my hunger. I didn't know how long I sat there. The next thing I knew, the fire had gone out and it was almost morning. By the third night, I was almost looking forward to it. The visions I had of Maddie, they felt so real. I didn't mind going hungry anymore. I hadn't felt this motivated in years. When I lit the candle that night, I felt something shift inside me. Like something locking into place. I was ready to begin. The next night I cleared out my living room. Then I burned a mixture of herbs. I made sure to spread the smoke all around my apartment. It wasn't long before I heard a banging on my door. It was the old lady across the hall. She complained about how the smell was stinking up the whole floor. But I couldn't stop. I didn't answer the door. I had to keep going. Last I heard, she was going to call the fire department on me. Now, there were 6 steps I needed to follow, and each step had to be done at midnight. The book also said I couldn't move on to the next one until the signs were clear. Step 1. Light the candles made from the fat of a condemned man, then recite the first incantation. I pulled out the candles I got off the dark web. I placed one in each cardinal direction, north, south, east, and west. At exactly midnight, I went around and lit each one. Then I stood in the middle, and I opened up the Gospel of Worms. I didn't recognize the language the incantation was in. Plugging it into Google didn't turn up anything, so I wasn't sure if I even had the words right. I tried to pronounce each syllable as clearly as I could so that I hoped it'd be enough. The moment I finished reading, someone started banging on my door. Great. The last thing I needed was for the fire department to break my door down. But then the knocking moved. The next bang came from inside the walls. It knocked along the wall and into the next one, and when it got to the window, I heard something tap against the glass. I lived on the third floor. The curtains hid whatever made the sound. The knocking continued around the room with a steady rhythm. It did not stop until the sun came through the window. As soon as it did, I packed up the candles and I went to bed. I was exhausted, but hopeful. This must be the sign that the book talked about. I was ready for the next step. I woke up a few hours later. At this point in the ritual, I was allowed to eat again, but I wasn't really in the mood, because just the thought of what I needed to do next made me sick. Step 2. Drink a mixture of the fresh blood and the ashes of the innocent. The book listed the exact measurements for this one. I didn't need much blood, just enough for a mouthful. But the whole thing still made me queasy. I spent the day trying not to think about it, even when I prepped the materials. Shot glass, knife, antiseptic, and the ashes, of course. Then midnight rolled around. I took a deep breath and I cut my palm open. I watched the blood flow into the shot glass and mix with the ashes for the first time. I questioned what the hell I'd gotten myself into. If it weren't for knocking last night, I would have quit right then. The Gospel of Worms could have just been made up by some lunatic. But something did happen. I couldn't deny that. So I took a deep breath and I swallowed the shot. Gag. I fought the urge to vomit everything back up. I had to keep it down. I had to. And then nothing happened. I sat there on the floor waiting. I watched the clock tick towards dawn. But there were no signs. No knocks. No nothing. Not even a cold spot. I went through all that, and all I did was waste a whole day to save Maddie. No more mistakes. No more doubts. The next night I set everything up again. I didn't even think about it. I got my hand again, and I downed the whole shot in one go. Just a few moments later, horrible feelings surged through me. I couldn't stop it. I doubled over and vomited, and what came out was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was some sort of black, sticky fluid. It came out in these thick, dark ropes, and then it started to move. It crawled and expanded all over the floor. I wasn't throwing up by then anymore, but it still managed to spread until it covered the entire ground. It only stopped. Just before it touched the salt that lined the room, the black substance quivered for a moment. Then it began to sink between the floorboards. I watched as it slowly disappeared, as if it had never even been there. It didn't even leave a stain, and as soon as it was all gone, the knocking started again. Lots of them. They came from every wall now. Loud, overlapping, banging filled the entire room, like a whole crowd was cheering me on. It went on the entire night. When it finally stopped, I went straight to bed. When I woke up, it was already late afternoon. I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. Every part of me ached. My head throbbed like I downed a whole bottle of whiskey last night. It was like a bad hangover. I managed to get up and make some ramen. It wasn't much, but it was all I could handle. Eating it felt oddly comforting. It was the most normal thing I'd done in a long time. As the sun began to set, the landline rang out. The sound made me jump. Then I wondered, who the hell is calling me? I knew I couldn't answer it, though. I'd come too far to mess up the ritual. So I went over and unplugged the phone. A minute later, my cell phone started ringing. The screen lit up with matter. His name. I had a ton of missed calls and unread messages. Most of them were from him. It tore me up to ignore it, but I didn't think I should even read his text. What if that counted as contact with the outside world? The phone continued to ring. Sorry, Maddie, but this is for you. It'll be worth it, I thought. I shut the phone down. I had to prepare for the next step. Step 3. Construct an effigy with the personal belongings of the sick and surround it with salt. Compared to the last one, that sounded easy enough. I put together the old mannequin I brought just for this. Then I unpacked Maddie's clothes and his graduation portrait as midnight approached. I calmed myself by meditating. I got into the habit of doing that when I needed to calm down or pass the time. It reminded me that this was all worth it. I was almost at peace when the disconnected landline rang. It went off 3 times before it stopped mid-ring. At the stroke of midnight, I started on step 3. I put the mannequin together while I dressed it up in Maddie's clothes. I used an old hoodie of his and the shirt he wore the last time we went out together, and then I taped his photo onto the mannequin's face. Around the base of the mannequin, I poured a thick circle of salt. Then I stepped back and waited. The room was silent. Hours ticked by. By the time sunlight shone through the windows, I was pissed another night wasted. Maddie didn't have much time. I took everything apart and I went to bed. And when I woke up, I was still angry. What the hell did I do wrong? Maybe I needed to cleanse myself again. Worth a shot. I was barely eating anyway. I spent the whole day staring at a candle and thinking of Maddie. I couldn't afford any more mistakes. The ritual had to go perfectly from now on. That night I set everything up again. I reassembled the figure and I fixed up the clothes and I made sure the salt circle was as perfect as I could make it. I waited. And again, nothing happened that night. I waited until morning. Then I tore the mannequin apart. I tore the clothes off more roughly than necessary. What was I missing? What more could I possibly do? I was starving and exhausted. I could feel my ribs through my shirt, and I could barely stay on my feet. I stumbled into the kitchen for something to eat, but when I opened the fridge, I had to slam it shut again. The smell hit me hard. Everything in the fridge had gone bad. Vegetables had liquefied. The meat had turned green. There were maggots everywhere. The milk had exploded and turned into a curdled mess at the bottom. I just bought all that food a few days ago, and the fridge was still running fine. I checked the cupboards, but everything had rotted there too. The cans were covered in rust. The ramen was covered in mold. Even the peanut butter had turned into a dark shade of green. And then it dawned on me. This was the sign I was waiting for. I could move to the next step. This would mean I won't have anything to eat until the ritual is done. But I was halfway through. Only 3 more steps to go. I can last that long. For Maddie. Step 4. Burn the effigy while chanting the second incantation. I dragged myself back to the living room to set up. The mannequin stood right in the middle of the room, the one that I just pulled apart. It was wearing Maddie's clothes. The salt circle was drawn neatly around it. Everything was all set up for the next step. I just had to wait for midnight. I collapsed into bed, exhausted but relieved. This was almost over, and Maddie would be cured in just a few days. I fell into a deep sleep. It was the best I'd had in weeks when I woke up. It was almost midnight. My body felt weaker than before I went to bed. I struggled to get myself to the living room, and yet I was excited. With shaking hands, I struck a match and I lit up the mannequin. It caught fire immediately. The flames spread over the figure. The smell of burning plastic filled the air. I began to chant the second incantation. I could barely hold the book up, but I concentrated on sounding out every syllable. And as I chanted, Maddie's photo began to move. The image turned its head, and it smiled at me. Then his face got closer, like the Maddie in the photo was walking towards me. His face filled the frame. Then the fire reached the photo. Its edges started to melt. And as the picture warped, Maddie's face transformed from a smile into a horrified scream. The moment I finished the chant, the landline started ringing. It echoed throughout the apartment. Each ring drilled into my ears. It only stopped when the fire went out. By the end of it, the mannequin was a melted pile of plastic. The clothes had all burned away. The photo was a charred, crumpled ball. I was too tired to clean up. I staggered to the bedroom, and I crawled into bed. But as soon as I put my head on the pillow, the whole thing collapsed. The frame cracked in two. I pushed myself up all around me. My home was just falling apart. The paint curled and flaked off. Cracks formed on the ceiling. The windows were now covered in grime. I heard a light bulb explode somewhere. I went to the bathroom sink. The water that came out barely formed a stream. I caught as much as I could for a drink. After a few seconds, it stopped completely. Then I saw myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. My face was covered in small, fresh cuts. I had no idea where they came from. I tried to wipe the blood. My shirt was torn and full of holes. I didn't really have time to dwell on that. I just wanted to sleep. I collapsed on the couch. A cloud of dust puffed up when I did. The springs dug into my back and I couldn't sleep. So I just stayed there, thinking of Maddie. I missed him more than ever, but we were going to see each other soon. I just need to survive this ritual. 2 more steps left. I held on to that thought as I waited for midnight. Throughout the day, I could hear things breaking down. Furniture fell apart, glass shattered. Every now and then I heard another light bulb explode. By evening, every appliance I had stopped working, but I stayed on the couch. I needed to save up my strength for the next part of the ritual. Step 5. Look at a mirror in the darkness. I started by clearing away the burned up mannequin from last night. Then I carried the bathroom mirror to the living room. I set it up against one of the walls. The last thing to do was to wait until midnight. I wished I could do my meditation thing again to pass the time, to forget how hungry I was. But the candles were all used up, so I just laid on the floor. It hurt too much to move. By midnight, the apartment was completely dark. Normally, the street lamps outside would at least filter through the windows, but that night there was nothing. Did the whole neighborhood lose power? I was too tired to check or even care. The room was hot and stuffy, and it was hard to breathe. I sat up and faced the mirror. I wasn't even sure if I actually was in front of a mirror. I couldn't even tell if my eyes were open or not, but I stayed still, and I hoped I could make it until the next step. The next thing I knew, the morning light was hitting my face. I was sprawled on the living room floor. My body felt stiff and sore. It seemed like I fell asleep during the night. I looked up to see if something happened to the mirror. I saw my reflection looking back. Standing behind me was the mannequin. It was completely intact, but the clothes looked new. Its face was different. It looked like Maddie now. I snapped. That crossed the line. This ritual, or whatever's behind it, couldn't just use Maddie like that. I shoved the mannequin into the closet. But as soon as I slammed the door, a soft knocking sound came from the inside. I froze. The knocking grew louder, more persistent. And for the first time, I started to truly question what forces I'd invited into my home. I went to a window. The knocking continued. I needed something normal, something familiar. I looked out, and the streets were empty. It was the middle of the day, but there were no cars, no people. The sun shone brightly. The sky was clear blue, but it looked wrong. It looked like it was colored by a child. I looked around and I saw something move slowly across the street. It was a man, I think. He moved strangely, like his joints were placed in wrong, and he was tall, too tall. The head reached all the way to the top of the window. On top of his head were a pair of goat horns. I stepped back in shock. I didn't want that thing seeing me, but as I stumbled back, I bumped into something behind me. I turned around, and I saw Maddie's face grinning at me. The mannequin had its hands reaching out towards me. I lashed out, and I knocked its head off its body. It crashed against a wall before landing with a dull thud. It rolled around the floor until it faced me again. And then around the severed head, there started to ooze blood. I flipped through the Gospel of Worms. None of this felt right for a healing ritual. My hands trembled from a combination of hunger, exhaustion, and fear. I struggled to read the messy handwriting, but it seemed like I did everything right. I got to the last page of the book, and there was only one step left. Step 6. Offer up your happiest memory. This section was harder to read than the rest of the book. The handwriting was Messier, like the author was in a rush when he wrote it. I went through the page over and over again. I needed to really understand what this ritual would do. And that's when I was finally able to make out a short note scrolled at the bottom of the page. It was a warning. It said that a banishing spell must be performed after the wish has been granted. If not, fulfilling the wish would release something into the world. I didn't know what that something was. The author had covered the name in thick, dark lines. I turned the page to the banishing spell, but it had been torn out of the book. Heavy footsteps echoed through the apartment. The light outside dimmed, but not because it was almost evening. No, it looked like someone was turning the sun off. The blue sky turned gray. It looked even more flat now, like it was made of something solid. It looked like a giant gray wall trapping me here. And then the sky began to crack. Giant fractures formed and pushed the world apart. Something moved in the corner of my eye. It was the mannequin. Its head was back on its neck, and it wasn't smiling anymore. Instead, it looked sad, disappointed. Like how the real Maddie looked the last time I saw him. All he wanted was for me to stay, to be there for him when he needed me, like he'd always been for me. He wouldn't have wanted any of this. He wouldn't want this evil released into the world. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, and I was just about to make the biggest one. I threw the book down. I dug out my phone and I turned it on. I prayed to God that it wasn't too late. Everything else in my apartment had stopped working, but somehow the phone powered up like normal. It even had a full battery left. I unlocked the screen. Notifications started flooding in. Missed calls and unread messages from Maddie. He wrote that he was worried, that he was scared. He said he kept having the same dreams about me ever since I stopped visiting. He saw visions of me trapped in my apartment as I was burned alive, and he just wanted to know if I was all right. God, I was an idiot. With shaking hands, I dialed his number. He picked up on the third ring, and I said, "Hey, Maddie, can I come by today?" And that was all it took. As we talked, sunlight filtered through the room again. Outside, I could hear cars driving by and people talking. It was over. I told Maddie I was coming by later with a new stack of books for him, and he said he'd wait up for me. Before I left, I wrote down one final rule in the book. Step 7. Don't do the ritual. I'm here to give you a warning. Whatever you do, don't hike the Rockridge Trail. Now, I've seen plenty of strange things since I started working here. There was a time I saw a row of 8 stars moving in a uniform single file line across the night sky. Clark and I were on an extended trip into the backcountry at the time, and both of us went to bed that night believing with 100% certainty that we had seen aliens. The next day, we decided to pack up our tools and gear and hightail it back to base camp. We dropped our bags and whipped out our phones as soon as we entered Wi-Fi range, only to find that they were just the SpaceX Starlink satellites. Another time, there was a family who claimed that they'd been attacked in their sleep. They peeled out of the parking lot before I could ask what happened when checking the campsite. I found a partially destroyed drawing in the fire pit. It looked like it was drawn by one of their kids. It depicted the 2 parents holding hands with their heads hung low. The son had drawn himself, looking frightened, in a tent while winged skulls bit down on the sides of the tent. He's probably going to be afraid of camping now, never knowing it was just some wild horses getting curious. They tend to wake people up by biting the sides of tents from the inside. It is truly terrifying. I mean, you can imagine a floating mouth with human-looking teeth and gums biting your tent. That would make anyone hide in their sleeping bag. But now there's something going on that I can't explain. I'm writing this not expecting anyone to believe me. They told me not to tell anyone, but I feel as though it's my duty to do so anyway. It all started on a day like this. I was outside the visitor station, watering the flowers when I saw a hiker emerge from the woods of the clearing. The first thought that ran through my mind was when you got to go. You gotta go. But he wasn't going to the bathroom. No. As soon as he went in, he came right back out. He looked around desperately for a moment, then beeline to the visitor center. I messed up and forgot to lock it while I was working outside. Now I thought the glass would shatter the way he flung the door open. He didn't listen as I shouted after him that we were closed, instead slamming the door shut behind him. I tried the door, but he'd locked it. I fumbled with my keys, looked through the glass, and I took a closer look at the man who'd run inside. "No, don't open it," he said, although muffled by the door. They followed me. Now the only thing on my mind was bears or maybe bees. I turned around to look for what was chasing him, and I saw nothing. And then I looked back through the glass to try and get a better look at him. He looked terrible. Sunken eyes, hysterical hair, and he looked dehydrated. Seeing an opportunity, he opened the door. grabbed me by the collar and dragged me forcefully into the building. I fell to my knees and had to pull in my feet at the last second before he slammed the door, even though he was talking to me. He never took his eyes off the parking lot. I could get a good look at him now, and he looked like he'd been out in the woods for weeks. His shirt was torn, and his skin was covered in scrapes and bruises. Had he been running through a briar patch of trail, shirtless? He was bleeding from too many places to count. I started to speak, but he interrupted me by putting his hands together and begging, please don't make me go back outside. Okay, you can stay. Just tell me what happened, I said, trying to calm him down. Wait, you don't understand. The bathroom doors, they don't go all the way to the ground. There's enough space for them to get through, he said, racing around the room, trying to check the seals on the windows. What exactly is going to get through? I asked. What do you mean? He grabbed my shoulders. His breath reeked as he spat. I was attacked while I was sleeping. I got here Friday. They trapped me in the tent. I don't know what they were. Needles. I couldn't believe my eyes. Yeah, it was needles poking through the tent walls. They hurt so bad. I started to feel weak. I had to run. Needles. I escaped his grasp and reached over the desk for the phone. I crushed so many of them with my hands. He continued while I dialed 911, and I told him we needed an ambulance. I looked back over at him, and he did not look good. He lost balance, bracing himself against the wood panel wall, and then he slid like a rag doll to the ground, just barely missing a water fountain. I rushed over, and I moved him carefully until he lay flat on the carpet, confirming a pulse. Ranger Clark came running inside, his eyes growing wide when he saw an unconscious body on the floor. What happened? He said, rushing over to help the hiker. That I don't know, I said. He said he was attacked. These wounds, they don't look like anything I've seen before. What was he attacked by? He asked. All over his skin were scratches and unidentifiable bites. He looked like he was allergic to them, whatever it was. Maybe it was vampire bats. For all we knew, Clark disappeared into the office, returning quickly with hands full of alcohol and gauze bandages. We treated the hiker's wounds as best we could and then waited with him on the floor, feeling useless. I spent much of those hours rethinking all my life choices. Why was I even here? But there'd been nowhere else for me to go. My parents had kicked me out. I was coasting, they said. On my 24th birthday, there were no candles. You need to face real life as an adult, they said. I couldn't afford rent, and I didn't want to go into a lifetime of debt to go to college, but they wouldn't listen. Instead, they gave me 3 months. So I applied to hundreds of jobs. Nobody was hiring. The amount of times I read the words 3 to 5 years relevant experience required on an entry-level job posting was discouraging. When the email from Rockridge Park came in, I could hardly read it because my hands were shaking. I had interviewed with this ranger named Clark for a position working for the Forest Service. He explained how we would do everything together. From backcountry hiking to eating meals, he talked for a long time about how I could expect to work hard, cleaning campsites and updating the trails to prevent erosion. But truthfully, the only words I ever really heard him say were North Carolina. It didn't matter what this job was, North Carolina was about as far away from home as I could imagine. This was an escape. So I accepted. Clark emailed me a list of items the Forest Service will provide, basically food and shelter, my new home. And a few days later, I was throwing my whole life and whatever backpacking gear I could find into my car. I hugged my mom, but my dad would hardly look at me. The lingering memory of their concerned faces as I backed out of the driveway never left my mind. As I drove the hundreds of miles east to North Carolina, I lived my whole life in Utah, so witnessing the environment change on the drive, it felt like a religious experience. The world out here, it's just so much more green, and the biodiversity is truly astounding. But that all feels like a lifetime ago. The wounded hiker shook me to my core. The EMT told us he needed blood immediately. It wasn't the wounds or the desperation in his eyes. It was the unknown. What had left all those bites all over him? The next morning, Clark and I set out to investigate his campsite. There were a few possible places he could have camped, and he'd chosen a campsite near the swimming hole just a few miles down the Rockridge Trail. It's one of our most popular campsites, surrounded by a quiet brook, feeding into a small pond where you can swim. The hiker had left everything behind. His gear was all about after the aftermath of some fierce battle. His pack was tossed against a tree, with all his food still sealed inside the bare canister. Clothes were still hanging from a tree limb to dry. His tent flap was open, the zipper moving lightly in the breeze. I looked inside and I retched from the smell. I took a step back, covering my nose with my shirt, steeled myself for a corpse, and I looked back inside. Now, bear with me for what I'm about to tell you next, because it was like nothing I've ever seen. Inside the tent was a face. Not a body, a face too small to be human. But it was human. It was deflated, laying flat like a cheap latex Halloween mask. But it was too real to be a costume. The eyes were gray and glassy, and the nose lay at a concave angle where you could see nose hairs. The only thing I can compare it to are those melted clocks from that surrealist type painting. The persistence of memory. The thing that still haunts me most, though, it was the hair. Patchy, wiry human hair. A beard coming from oily skin. I yelled for Clark to come look. I was shocked, backed up too far, and I lost my footing on a tree stump. "What did you find?" he said, dropping a tarp the camper had left behind and sprinting towards me. I pointed to the open door of the tent. Clark pulled the flap back slowly, took one look inside, ducked away from the tent and vomited. It was the smell, I think. I'm aware of what decay smells like. This wasn't like that. We took a second to calm down. Holding his breath, Clark grabbed a stick and fished the face out of the tent. We stood a few feet away, not knowing what to make of it. The face was attached to a small body. You could make out individual parts, like a leg here and wings there. It was completely destroyed, but we could tell that it wasn't human. Too big to be a bird or insect, but it somehow had the parts of a bird or insect. Whatever it was, the hiker had fought and killed it, smashing the small body. But the human-looking face remained. We didn't know what else to do, and it was getting dark, so we left. The long walk back to civilization started in silence. I don't think either of us felt like attracting unwelcome attention in these woods. There was something big going on here. It couldn't have been his face, right? I mean, the hiker's face. I wondered if Clark was thinking what I was thinking, that it had almost looked like the guy who'd been attacked. The narrow beams of light from our headlamps guided our way, providing little comfort as we trudged on back to the parking lot. We were a few miles down the trail when Clark and I stopped to drink water. I was deep in my own head, thinking about getting in my car, calling the police and leaving. "Promise not to be mad," Clark said. I swallowed a gulp of stale water from my bottle. "Let me guess, you made a perfect replica mask of that guy's face, and you put it in the tent to scare me, right?" And then he emptied a backpack full of dead animals into it for the realistic smell. He didn't smile, though. "No, I found something else. I wasn't going to tell you because I thought you're mad, but it doesn't make sense to keep this from you. I'm scared and I'm sorry. I just don't want to be the only one who knows about this in case something happens," he said. And I braced myself for what would come next. "I found something in the pond next to his camp," Clark said, removing his pack, unzipping the largest compartment, and then he pulled out a t-shirt that was wrapped around something. He pulled the shirt back to reveal an elongated black rock, the light from my headlamp, reflected off the smooth surface. It was perfectly smooth and pill-shaped, about the size of a football. Clark told me to touch it, and I laid my palm against it. It was warm, alive. "We have to bring some evidence back." "No one will believe us if we don't," Clark said. "We should have burned it, Clark," I replied. "We can't burn it. If it's some new species and it's coming after hikers, it's our duty as stewards of the environment and for the safety of the visitors to tell people," Clark replied. "How noble of you," I said. "If it was up to me, we'd take that thing out of your pack, lay it on the ground, and stomp on it," I said. "I don't care if an alien embryo pops out in the sludge. We need to kill it before it hatches." "See, I knew you'd act like this," he replied. He wrapped it back in the t-shirt, and he closed his pack before I got any bright ideas. I fell behind on the trail. I'd said my piece. I stayed far enough behind Clark to at least be ready if the creature hatched. If I was behind him, I could at least see it coming and grab something to defend myself. I thought the whole thing was short-sighted and dangerous. Evidence was not on my list of priorities at the moment. We didn't even know what this thing was. I walked as fast as I could without overtaking him, and finally, we made it back. The egg went straight into the drink's cooler. We closed the latch and then stacked no less than 6 cinder blocks on top. I started packing. I had made my decision hours ago on the hike. This is not smart, and I do not want to be any part of it, I said, while Clark watched with a worried face. You should come too. You can leave. I'm not going to try to stop you, he started. But at least wait until morning, right? The dirt roads are risky to drive at night. If you got stuck or took a wrong turn, you could be weaving the switchbacks all night. Also, I don't think we should split up, he said. And he had a point. At the very least, I didn't think we should split up. We'd witnessed something today that couldn't be explained, and we were both unsettled. I finally decided to stay on the condition that both of us leave early in the morning together. We shook on it. Then Clark poured us both a drink. Whiskey. He disappeared for a moment into his room, opened a wooden case I'd never seen before that was stashed away. He brought out some cigarettes. I quit smoking, but I took one anyway. We drank more than we should have while going wild with our theories. I don't remember most of them now, but we circled around a few major points. We guessed that maybe the face was actually a replica mask he made himself using skin from. Some animals. Maybe he got some weird thrill out of wearing it. I don't know. But that didn't even explain the smell. Or maybe this guy hated his twin brother with an acid hatred that poisoned every moment of their lives. Maybe he resented his brother for having the same face. I don't know. Maybe he was paranoid and disturbed, so he'd murdered him, throwing his body into the pond. We laughed. This was crazy. We were letting our crazy imaginations run wild. I mean, in reality, the guy seemed pretty normal to me. Shook up, sure, but normal. Clark stumbled over to the logbook where guests check in reserved campsites. Okay, well, we can put that one to rest. Looks like he didn't check in with a twin brother. He smiled, lost balance, but managed to catch himself. I watched his inebriated fingers scroll slowly down a list of names until he said at least no one on this list. And then he paused and read silently to himself. Well, wait a minute. Oh, shit, no, this can't be right. I jumped out of my seat, joining him in the logbook. His finger pointed at the long list of names, and 2 most recent logins had not logged out. 2 names, Rachel and John from Tennessee, were checked on Friday. Destination Rockridge, and it was Sunday night. Most backpackers arrive on a Friday and are back at their cars Sunday morning. These hikers never checked out. The Rockridge Trail is a 10-mile loop. The overlook, where most backpackers decide to set up camp, is halfway at about 5 miles there and back. Clark and I looked at each other, and he broke the silence first. Sobering up is for the fishes, he said. Taking one more swig, we started packing immediately. Mechanically filling water bottles, throwing energy bars into our day packs. A 5-mile hike is not too long for us, even at night. We'd done this exact hike hundreds of times. We'd spent weeks out there, living out of a base camp and working each day on maintaining the trail. I cursed when I realized I hadn't plugged in my headlamp to charge. We didn't have any weapons. But I thought we looked very resourceful when we finally landed on a pickaxe and bear spray. For a second, I almost laughed at the image of us gearing up, about to set off into the dark to rescue some poor, unaware hikers. I need to sober up now. It's always eerie to hike at night, having such a narrow cone of vision. It's just unsettling. Whether you know the area or not, you can't see anything, but everything else can see you. A hiking trail is barely a refuge from the elements. In fact, bears and moose have been known to use them, just as humans. Clark and I clicked on our headlamps, both using red lights to avoid losing night vision. We started walking as fast as we could without wearing ourselves out. The moon lit our path until we reached the trailhead, where trees would swallow us whole for several hours. The hike was long. It felt very different at night, like the landmarks were further away. Everything kind of blended together. Our headlamps cast light over looming tree limbs and beetles scattered from the trail in front of our boots. Something cracked a stick just beyond the trees, but we just kept moving. At one point, I heard Clark say to himself, "Miles before smiles." It was an old hiking mantra, usually said by people who were tired. At least we were sober now and able to take in the gravity of our situation. I felt disoriented when we arrived at the base of the hill. When you're about 5 miles deep on Rock Ridge Trail, you'll emerge from a densely wooded area, and you'll find yourself in a clearing at the base of a hill. It's a stunning spot. The views are amazing. It's one of my personal favorites, a popular spot for hikers to stop and have a break, partly because it's beautiful during the day, and partly because you can see what lies ahead. You're going to climb a hill, a huge hill. The elevation change at this point in the trail is higher than any other point in the park. You can stop here to fortify yourself. Clark and I were drinking water when we saw them. The campers were staying at one of the more popular campsites, the one near the ridge. The light coming from their tent was flickering on and off. We stared at the light, both quickly recognizing the pattern. Then 3 short flips again, SOS and Morse code. We sprinted up the mountain, and I was completely out of breath. As I got closer to their tent, there was this mysterious buzzing noise, like a helicopter that was very far away. And as I got closer, it began to sound more like a horse fly does when it flies close to your ear, but 10 times louder. Finally, I created the last rock step, and I turned my head to point the light at the tent. The buzzing was coming from inside. There was an erratic battering against the inner walls of the tent. It sounded like wings, and just then the girl inside saw my light and screamed for help. I ran. Clark was right behind me as we approached the tent, and the sound was so loud now. The tent was covered with a separate outer waterproof layer known as rainfly, like one tent set up over a small tent to keep the rain out. I unzipped the outer door, and what was inside will haunt me for the rest of my days. They were like giant flying insects. They hovered between the inner and outer tent like hummingbirds, their wings beating against material. If they saw the opportunity, they would poke their needle-like mouth through the mesh window, aiming to make contact with a poor hiker's skin. The needles made sense now. On their backs, they had large sacs filled with red liquid, probably blood. The beating of their wings was so loud, and they sensed me behind them, retracted their needles from the tent walls with surgical precision, and then flew off into the night. I tried to follow them with my light, but I lost them in the trees. They were too quick, their wings moving at a speed I would not have thought possible for their size. I mean, they looked like hummingbirds or dragonflies when they flew, like they could move at any angle, forward, back, or diagonal. I opened the tent flap again, and the hikers were both inside. I asked the girl, who I assumed to be Rachel, if she was okay. She was clutching a sleeping pad halfway, deflated, and had been using it to bat away the needles as they repeatedly lunged for her skin. She was panicked, completely traumatized. The boy passed out behind her. I whispered that it was going to be okay, instructed her to stay put, and that I'd be right back. Clark and I searched the clearing. Our lights bounced from one tree to the other. We waited for the sound of wings. We didn't know much, but at least we knew they were either too far away for us to hear them, or they'd landed. And then Clark startled me when he grabbed my arm. I looked to where his headlamp was pointing. He was illuminating a low tree branch about 10 feet high. The creature was perched there, like an owl. I thought I would lose my mind just looking at it. A human face sat there on an insect's body. It had this dull expression. The face did not blink, and the pupils didn't dilate in the light. It was like a face that was missing the crucial essence that it takes to look human. Its body was segmented, all black, like an insect, and it just sat there, grooming its front legs with its back legs. The wings were folded back, resting behind it. The transparent material reflected off our headlamps, flashing. The eyes never once turned to look at us, and then suddenly we heard the sound of wings closing in on us. We braced ourselves, not wanting to take our light away from the creature. The beating of wings got closer and closer, and then stopped. Another one had landed in the same tree. the weight of its body causing tremors down the branch, and both creatures stayed totally still as we watched them from below. I didn't know what to do. It was just quiet for a moment, broken only when the hiker screamed from inside the tent. "For the love of God, kill him." And at that moment, they all moved together. They descended from the tree to the ground, leaves scattering as they landed. They started walking towards us. They looked like crickets when they walked on the ground, but crickets with blank human faces, twitching and cocking to the side as they approached. I was terrified, but I felt the weight of my pickaxe in my hand. I carried it all this way, after all. And just then Clark disappeared. The things kept coming closer and closer, the light never leaving them for a second. They were just a few feet away now, and I realized that they had the faces of the boy and the girl in the tent. It was uncanny. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The creature on the right even had blue eyes like the girl. The creature approaching on the left had a strong jaw and dark rims around its eyes like the boy I braced, ready to swing the pickaxe down with all my strength. I was sure one of them was going to start running at me, and I'd miss it, and it would scurry up my leg, and then it would stab me through the heart with its needle mouth and extract my DNA and mimic my face. But they didn't. They just kept walking towards us slowly, all together. They were nearly within my range. When they opened their mouths wide, and if they spoke then, I would have screamed. I couldn't move, and I saw a black snake, like an elephant's trunk, emerge from the back of their throats. Just then, Clark heaved this boulder. It went through the air in slow motion, making direct contact with the bug imitating the boy. The boulder smashed down on top of it. Direct hit. The other insect, the one imitating the girl, skittered away into the trees. I looked back at the injured creature. It was trying to escape mechanically, like an insect stuck to a glue trap, and I brought my pickaxe down on its face. It stopped moving. Clark and I looked at each other. "Where'd the other one go?" I asked, eyes darting from tree to tree. "I don't know, but keep looking." "They can run as fast as they can fly," Clark replied. The second insect skittered towards my feet, too fast for me to swing my pickaxe. I swung, missed, and jumped into the air at the last second to avoid it running up my legs. The creature ran underneath me and disappeared again into the trees. We heard it fly, then stop, fly, and stop. Clark and I stood back to back, me holding my pickaxe and Clark wielding bear spray. I looked up and it was directly above me. It dropped onto me from the trees. I ducked so it didn't land on my face, but it was so heavy and its talons dug into my back. I dropped my pickaxe and started reaching behind me. I was just trying to tear it off. I caught its wings and I pulled as hard as I could, throwing it to the ground. It tried to fly away, but Clark immediately started dousing it with bear spray. It was stunned and disabled. It started hopping away blindly, but we caught up to it. Clark jumped onto it with both his feet, crushing it beneath him. It was like he jumped into a rain puddle. Blood splattered everywhere, but there was no time to lose. I asked the girl if she could walk, and she said yes, and we abandoned the campsite, Clark carrying the unconscious boy in his arms, and we set away on the long trek back. I could start to see their wounds as the morning light came through the trees. They were both covered in those same bumps that the first hiker had been. Perfect raised circles with a single spot of blood in the center. They looked like huge mosquito bites. My mind went wild on the long walk back. These creatures, they took on the likeness of the animals they drank the blood of. It had to be some old world evolutionary advantage that a long extinct creature would have. I shouldn't be telling you any of this, but that all happened a few weeks ago. The park has been closed since then, but I still feel like it's my duty to warn any would-be hikers. A team came out. They were probably from the government, but I don't really know. They wouldn't tell me anything. Their vans were unmarked, but they did wear uniforms. The uniforms had this weird symbol I didn't recognize, like a circle with an arrow pointing inwards. I dug around on the internet and I found a website for this, an organization called the SCP. That stands for Secure, Contain, Protect. We showed them our cooler where we snatched the egg that Clark had found. It had already hatched and was bashing around inside the cooler, but luckily the cinder blocks helped. I watched as the SCP people drilled a hole in the top of the cooler. The black snake from the bug's mouth tried to get through, but the team quickly fed a clear tube through the hole. They filled the cooler with some liquid and the cooler went silent. They carted that off, but not before wrapping it 3 times with what looked like regular duct tape. They told us to hold back, that we couldn't go with him, but Clark and I insisted that we needed to show them the swimming hole where we found Egg. When we got there, we didn't waste time. They put on scuba gear, many of them going into the water. We waited when they came out. They spoke amongst themselves for a while. They walked us back into the woods, and then they gave a signal to a man with a detonator. They were very thorough. They told us that they have ways of killing the queen. They said the nest shouldn't bother us anymore and that it's even safe to swim, but I'm not so sure sometimes when I look out the window at night. I think I see my own face hovering just outside the glass, looking back at me. This is a warning. Do not hike the Rockridge Trail. The fact that I'm posting this should be an indication of just how bad the situation is. My name is Sean Hammond. I'm a sheriff's deputy for Barron County, a small rural county in southern Ohio. It always amazes me how many people don't seem to know where that is, and even more curious, how few maps out there actually show it. I never could really figure out why our little section of the Appalachian foothills has gone unnoticed for so long. It's almost as if the rest of the world has forgotten about it. And for its own part, Barron County seems to neither notice nor care. Ever since the coal company stopped most of its mining operations in the mid-'80s, Barron County hasn't had a lot going for it, other than being a great place to go camping still. There are people here, and when you get enough people in an area, that generally equals jobs, which means money, which means crime committed by those who don't want to get a real job against those that do. That vicious cycle is what fuels my job, even though I dread the calls as much as the next cop on the beat. Usually it's either a domestic dispute or a drug overdose, since Barron County seems magnetic to drug dealers. And it can get exhausting at times. You get callous to the demanding, uncooperative families, the repeat offenders who show no shame, and the tight-lipped women with bruises on their faces that couldn't have come from a tumble down the stairs. After a while, you get to where you think you've seen it all. That's where I was in my career. Until a few weeks ago, I sat in my car along a lonely stretch of Route 142. A 2-lane asphalt RD. That stretches the length of the county and connects the town of Collingswood in the center to the slightly bigger city of Black Oak in the north. My buddy and de facto partner James Walker slouched in his patrol car parked beside me, facing the opposite direction so we could talk to each other from our roll-down driver's windows while we took our lunch break. "So which one?" James said, chewing on a sandwich, the usual tuna, fish, and rye combo that he always brought without fail. I grinned and poked in my Tupperware bowl, full of barbecued beef. "Andrea for sure," James grunted in friendly mirth. "You and redheads, man." "She's nice," I replied. I defended my choice of which pretty courthouse clerk I'd rather date, with my plastic fork poised in the air like a pointer to seem intellectual. Every time I go in there, she has this big smile on her face and she doesn't act like she's too busy to talk to me. Yeah, and she's smoking hot, right?" James teased, his dark eyebrow raised. "Right." I laughed along with him. Though under my uniform, my heart skipped a beat at the flash memory of Andrea's pretty face, framed in crimson locks. Man, she was pretty. And every time I went into the courthouse for an errand, I almost couldn't bring myself to talk to her, as shy as a little kid on a playground. That didn't stop me from volunteering to be the guy who brought our records into the courthouse every Monday, however, and sometimes when I was alone on patrol. I practiced what I figured I'd say to her if I ever got the nerve to ask Andrea out. "Do you like barbecue? I know this great place in Collingswood." "No, that's not it." "Hey, Andrea, how do you feel about Ferris wheels? I am going to be working the guard shift at the county fair." And I thought, nah, that's no good either. James shifted in his driver's seat and wiped his fingers on a napkin. "Well, I'm still going to go with Tracy. She's got spice to her, and man, can she fill out a skirt?" Rolling my eyes at my friend's fascination with a blonde from the second floor, who wore everything as tight as she could get it and winked at every guy who noticed. I took a sip from my Coke. She's probably slept with like half the base to Unit 14. Jumped, and my radio crackled to life with the sound of our dispatcher's voice. James' grin faded, and all the thoughts of pretty women left my mind. The smell of my barbecued lunch now turned my stomach, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. Here we go. With clammy fingers, I reached for my shoulder mic to click the black talking button down. Base, this is Unit 14. Send your traffic. A few moments passed, and I prayed that it was something minor. A raccoon in the school trash cans, a branch down across the nursing home driveway, or old Miss Phillips calling to complain about the neighbor's dog barking too loud for the 8th time this week. Unit 14 respond to a distress call from a campsite at 1849 Bethesda Ridge Road. Reports of possible child abduction. At least one civilian is missing. A night ranger from New Wilderness is already on site. Link up with him. Proceed with caution. Unit 14 copies all. Moving to respond, I replied. Pushing the lid back onto my half-finished lunch, I tossed the container into my passenger seat and put my car into drive. Hey, Base, this is Unit 13. James clicked his mic and threw me a nod from his car. I'm nearby. Moving in as a backup now. Copy. I frowned, shook my head, the blood cold in my veins. You don't have to do this, but my partner just let slide a small knowing half smile and nodded back. Yes, I do. Unit 13. This is Base. Solid copy on all showing you in Unit 14, dispatched at 2348. Flicking my lights on, I threw James one last look, and together we swung our patrol cars around to pull onto the long, dark road. My guts twisted, the shadowy landscape flying by, and I cursed under my breath. Despite the drug problems and domestic abuse issues, Barron County was quiet, rustic, and even nice in some places. Most of the normal people were salt-of-the-earth types, and even though I wasn't a church-going man, I could appreciate the idea of a guy in the sky helping keep people from getting too rambunctious. People down here didn't riot when we arrested some dope head for beating his wife, and the kids all smiled and waved when we drove by in town. We got treated like human beings for the most part, and rarely did we have to respond to anything, other than an overdose or a husband-wife screaming match that woke up half the neighborhood. But New Wilderness was different. Round stones ground under the tires of my squad car, and I swerved around countless potholes, the blood pumping in my veins. Barron County's government had rolled out a modest but rather successful RD repair program a few years back. And yet, none of the crews ever seemed to make it down to the claustrophobic dirt roads surrounding the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. With 12,000 acres of mixed woods and grassland partially fenced into house-endangered species, it bordered a colossal 70,000 acres of forested recreational ground still owned by the coal industry, making it the most rural and picturesque place in all of Barron County. Still, the park seemed to garner very little sympathy or attention from local authorities, almost as if they hoped it would slide off the map, which I found odd since New Wilderness brought in a fair amount of business from big city tourists. Unfortunately, the only memory I had of the place was of long hours tramping through wet, creaking trees with a canine unit from our neighboring county. Focus, I thought. I shut my eyes just for a moment, trying to force the memories out of my head. Still, I could see her, the girl they brought in all those months ago, covered in cuts and bruises, wearing someone else's clothes, her sky blue eyes, wild as a cornered animal. I hadn't been ready for that night. None of us had. It's not going to be like last time, I told myself. Drifting into one of the many campsites that dotted the vast expanse of recreational land, I spotted a big red pickup truck parked next to an expensive-looking white camper trailer. A black SUV squatted about 20 feet away, and I recognized the insignia of the New Wilderness Night Rangers immediately after everything from last October. How could I not? He didn't do it. I swear it was the road. It was the road. You have to believe me. The voice echoed in my mind, the girl's sobs, still as clear as the night her father had brought her into the station, soaking wet with black, smeary handprints all over her clothes. Stop, I muttered to myself, desperate to forget. It's over. It's not the same thing instead. I waited until James pulled up next to me and clicked my shoulder. Mike Base, this is Unit 14. I'm on site at 13, but the place looks deserted. I repeat, I don't see anyone on site making my first approach. Oh, copy. In the bright aura of my squad's car lights, I searched for a sign of movement, for someone hiding behind a camper or perhaps looking through the closed blinds. But I saw nothing. A small, nagging suspicion flared to life in the back of my mind, the ice under my skin telling me that something about this situation was very, very wrong. Unit 14, this is base. Solid copy on your first approach. We got units 12 and 11 on standby. If you need more backup, keep us posted. Base out. I swallowed the dry, sour-tasting lump in my throat, and I pushed my car door open. A musky aroma of wet, rotted leaves curled up from the damp ground on the thickening clouds of cotton white mist that hung between the murky treetops. This had been a warmer March than usual, at least in the beginning, and the roiling clouds overhead threatened rain with a new temperature front, mud squished under my shoes, deafening against the tomb-like silence of the nearby forest, as if every stick and stone held its breath in anticipation. Beyond the treetops, 3 white lights blinked sporadically in the distance, likely some kind of cell phone towers or radio antennas, though it was hard to tell from the ground. James appeared at my side in a flash, and we moved almost in sync, flashlights in hand. Free arm, rigid at our sides, ready to snatch for our tasers, batons, or, God forbid, our service weapons if necessary. With all the strange things I'd heard about this place, I wasn't sure if I wouldn't skip right to the Glock if things went as bad as my child imagined they might. Though the ranger was supposed to meet us here, James muttered, his hand on his gun. Eyes scanning the crowded trees beyond a tiny campsite, I cleared my throat to keep my voice from squeaking like a mouse. He was, I said. Let's check the vehicles, then clear the camper. If they're not here, we'll call it in and we'll wait for more backup. Moving closely as a team, James and I made our way to the red pickup truck and black SUV. Both were empty and we couldn't find any signs of foul play. It was as if the campers, along with a new wilderness ranger, had just up and vanished at the foot of the metal steps that led up into the camper. I paused and I drew my pistol. It weighed cold and heavy in my palm, a deadly reminder of how fast my job could get ugly if I wasn't very careful. Behind me came the soft click of James doing the same, and his hand gripped my shoulder in a silent signal that he was ready to follow me in. I rapped my pale knuckles against the cool fiberglass door of the camper, short and fast. Hello, Sheriff's Office. We got a call about a disturbance. Long, tense seconds ticked by, marked only by drum beats of the pulse in my ear. Nothing again. I banged on the door louder this time, in case somehow the occupants were asleep or hard of hearing. Sheriff's Office, open up. Is anyone there? Silence. Nothing but the strange, high-pitched creaking of trees in the distance, swaying with the wind. I hate this part, I thought, gripping the door handle. I pushed the button on the small light mounted under the frame of my Glock and shoved. The door swung inward about 5 inches. A strong coppery stench hit my nostrils, and from underneath the open door came a small trickle of cherry red fluid. I recognized it right away, and it made the already unpleasant situation that much worse. Someone was either hurt or dead, which meant this had just gone from a lost child to an investigation that could go on for weeks on end. If it was anything like the last one, it might not even be solved or recorded. My stomach gurgled in revulsion, but I rammed the door with my shoulder, and at last it gave way. Mary, Mother of God, inside the inky, cramped interior of the camper. The walls, ceiling, windows, and floor were covered in spattered chunks of torn viscera, thick scarlet smeared all over everything. It looked as if someone had been thrown into a jumbo-sized blender and then spewed out with a leaf blower, bits and pieces of unknown anatomy clotting under my shoe, to mix with the sticky Ohio clay from outside. The rank, metallic stink of blood hung thick in the air, and I tasted the beginnings of vomit in my throat. But the worst part about it all was the silence. Nothing moved. Not a sound could be heard, as if the place were a kind of holy shrine to some macabre deity. And to speak was a grave sin. James gagged and leaned against the doorframe. Dear God, what could have done this? Bear. I don't think so, I replied. I had to shut my eyes and breathe through my mouth to avoid hurling my barbecue beef all over the crime scene. No bear could do this. Coughing and spitting, James steeled himself and pointed his pistol toward the dim interior. Let's clear this. Let's get the hell out of here. I can't keep breathing this crap, he said. We padded slowly through the hellish darkness. Our guns raised, and every hair on my body stood on end. Fear overwhelmed my disgust, though, just barely. And as I moved through a small alcove into the narrow living/kitchen area, my guts twisted into a hard knot. "Are you seeing this?" I asked. I choked down a foul gulp of air and shone my light at the left side wall. In the living area, a couch lined one wall, across from a small compact range and mini fridge with some wooden cabinets over it. A big shattered window sat behind the couch to look out into the dark forest beyond and let in what little moonlight filtered through the gloomy, overcast sky. Glass covered the floor, but from what I could tell, it appeared that most of the shards had flown outward, as though someone had leapt headfirst through it. More blood caked the couch, with bits of glass glued to the floor in sharp crimson lumps. But it was the opposite wall, covered in smooth faux linoleum, that caught my attention. Handprints. Dozens upon dozens of handprints, some big and burly, others small and slender, dotted the wall like some freaky prehistoric cave. Rivulets of red still trickled down from the prints, as if whoever had made them had just gone, scuttling off into the night right before we pulled in. But they weren't the desperate claw marks of someone being attacked or dragged. These were purposeful, almost childlike in their placement, and from the various sizes I realized that it had to have been more than one person. In the middle of all the prints, as if framed by them in sacred reverence, were 4 words. "Look for the lights." James, I met his wide-eyed stare, a pistol trembling in my hand. "Call for backup. Call the sheriff. Get everyone out here now." He bobbed his head and reached for his shoulder-mounted radio mic. "Base, this is Unit 13. Requesting immediate backup." Static grated in the little plastic speaker. "Base, this is Unit 13. Do you copy?" My heart pounded as I realized that I couldn't hear him over my radio, that I didn't hear his radio crackle or click. I tried mine, clicking the talking button over and over, even turning the dials to try and reset it. Nothing. It's dead. I breathed, too scared to feel sick about all the gore I stood in, and my brain raced with terrified confusion. "How?" James said, pounding his fist against the radio on his belt in desperate frustration. I charged it. It was on full power. "We're not out of range. We can't be." Glancing down at the lifeless radio in my pale hand, I shook my head to clear the guilty memories away. "We have to go. Get back to the cars, get on the horn, and call somebody. This is bad, man. Real bad." James moved for the door, and I followed so close behind that I almost bumped into him when he lurched to a stop. "What the?" He backed up against one gore-encrusted wall in shock. I turned my head to follow, his gaze out a small window to our left. Unlike the big living area window, this one was intact, and through its hazy glass, I could just discern a white ball of light bobbing in between the trees. It looked just like the cell phone antenna lights I'd seen dotting the horizon, but this one moved up and down, swaying side to side through the trees, reminding me of the reflections of cow eyes when a flashlight is shone on them in the dark. The orb didn't move like a shooting star, and I knew that it was far too low to be an airplane. No, something about the erratic, almost hypnotic jerk seemed organic, like some gargantuan firefly that had at last ripped free of its prehistoric cocoon. In the distance, a faint screeching sound, followed closely by a dull thudding, echoed in a mechanical chorus. I took a step closer to the window, drawn in with moth-like wonder to the glow. "Are those footsteps?" I thought. Without warning, a greasy chunk of viscera slid under my shoe, and I tripped. The flashlight flew from my hands and rocketed into the floor with a deafening clack that sent chills down my spine. A clamor like a strange electro-synth foghorn tore through the air, and the camper was bathed in a blinding cascade of white light. Somewhere outside the camper, trees snapped, underbrush crashed, and the screech-thumping noises grew rapidly closer. Dull tremors went through the ground, up my legs and into my chest, growing more intense by the second, as whatever was outside drew nearer. No longer fascinated, I whimpered and crouched behind the window, too afraid to look out into the source of the beam. A small part of my brain told me that the thing outside was hunting us, like a wolf with cornered rabbits, and we'd walked right into its lair. Whatever it was, it had to know where we were. And this broken horse cave of a camper was no defense. We had only one choice, to run out and make for our patrol cars or stay, and end up smeared all over the walls. As if reading my mind, James darted to the steps of the trailer, and together we hurled into the night. Guns raised, trees crunched, branches snapped, and the mucky ground shook beneath my feet. Round beams of light probed the ground around me, like searchlights trying to find an escaped convict. Cold mud spattered up the back of my uniform trousers, and my lungs burned with a damp night air. Behind me, the camper let out a defeated squeal and collapsed under the weight of something massive, its fiberglass exterior shattering with ease. The red pickup truck groaned with a shriek of rending metal, and its panic alarm blared to life, only to be silenced moments later by another vicious thud. It was right behind us, so close I could almost see it in the corner of my eyes. A sharp, jerky shadow that crawled out of the dark like an angular nightmare. "Base, come in, we need." James' desperate plea cut out, and I turned to see him snag his shoe on a rock, and down he went. Panicked, I threw myself back toward him, but a wall of light hit me full in the face from directly overhead. On instinct, I looked up. Blinding white light poured into my eyes, and a harsh, high-pitched static filled my ears. My legs slammed to a stop. Every muscle in my body froze, as if paralyzed by some unseen hand. I couldn't think, couldn't move, and my breath barely trickled in and out of my chest. Deep inside my skull, I watched helplessly as my memories were pried open, like someone crawled in through my ears and started to rummage through the folds of my brain. I saw the auburn-haired girl who'd been found just outside New Wilderness last October, almost 12 miles from her abandoned car, dressed in someone else's clothes, and raving about a monster killing her friend. I noted the look of annoyance on the sheriff's face when she refused to admit that the guy she'd been with had accosted her instead, claiming it had been some dark, mysterious RD that had led her astray. I cringed at the detectives berating her, trying to accuse her before dismissing her the more she insisted on her bizarre tale. Lastly, I watched the girl turn to catch my eye as she was escorted out of the station for the last time, and caught her desperate, silent plea for someone to believe her. I hadn't. No one had. Yet when the detectives threw the case out, when the files went missing and the sheriff threatened to fire anyone who talked to the media about it, I knew it had been wrong. The girl didn't deserve to be treated that way. With each question I asked, the more hostile the department had become, and I became convinced that she'd been on to something that the sheriff knew about. And the detectives were afraid of something hiding in the forest of the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. "Now you see," a voice said. My head pivoted, almost as if someone turned it from me, and I blinked at 4 people who approached me out of the light. A man, woman, and young boy, all with outdoor clothes that a family of campers might wear, smile alongside an older man in his mid-40s, dressed in a black polo shirt of the New Wilderness Night Rangers. They all seemed so happy, so carefree, and beamed at me with contagious joy. "The light is perfect," the ranger, whose name tag read Daniel, made a bright, wide grin. "Safety," the woman sighed, her face glowing in the curtains of white light. "Peace," the man next to her echoed, his arms around the woman and little boy. Extending his tiny hand out to me, the boy, who looked no older than 8, giggled and beckoned me closer. "Come on, come play with us." Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, I thought. The light was nice, warm, and soft. I started to forget about the mysterious girl, the sheriff, and my job. What was my job? I couldn't remember. Something with cars. Cars and lights. A big brick building. A red-haired woman who smiled at me every time I went in. Coffee. But nothing like this. No, this was beautiful. Safe. Perfect. Unable to resist, I let the gun slide from my grip, all 5 fingers outstretched to take the boy's hand. A gunshot split the air, the light flickering between brilliant white and abysmal black. The 4 people in front of me screamed, their faces contorted into hateful glares of rage, eyes dark as night, and rivulets of ebony sludge spilled down their chins. Pain flared through my head, and I stumbled backward, clapping both hands to my eyes. A horrible, aching sensation, like I'd been staring at the sun, seared my vision and throbbed in my temples. Hands groped at my arms, clothes, and face, trying to pull me back toward them. But someone else jerked me backward by the pull strap on my ballistic vest, dragging me out of the light. shots fired, a voice screamed over a radio, and my heels dug backwards into thick, gooey mud. Through half-blind, bleary eyes, I watched the world around me jolt by. My limbs went numb, and I had to focus hard just to suck a breath in and out. My brain ached. Orbs of light bobbed in the trees all around us, more smashing through the forest like a swarm of bright white circles coming in to feed. They seemed to be swaying like the gait of someone walking down a sidewalk, but with less fluidity and more strained, jerky motions. Shaking hands leaned me back against the mud-spattered fender of a patrol car, and I blinked to clear my vision. And then I saw it. The thing stood as tall as the nearby pines, with 8 thin appendages arched in jagged angles like spider legs. In the glow of the patrol car headlights, I stared in shock at cold-rolled steel, not flesh, with snaking veins of braided steel cables that wound their way up the insectoid legs. These connected to a twisted cluster of fused eye beams that almost resembled a nightmarish spinal cord. At the end of this jumbled mass, ringed in 6 fist-sized light bulbs, a white-painted circular signal dish shook back and forth violently, with a single cone-shaped siren protruding beneath. Underneath the dish hung low, swaying cables covered in sticky coats of gore that writhed independently of each other, with 4 bloody figures hanging broken and torn amongst them. The lights flickered and sputtered from where James' bullet had smashed one of the powerful bulbs, dripping sparks like blood, and it seemed the creature was stunned by the damage it had sustained. The tower. It's a freaking radio tower. With a roar, the patrol car fired to life and James shoved me into the back seat, my arms and legs tingling with rubbery numbness. My head rested against the window, and I watched for the mobile fascination as the entire tree line lit up with more rings of light. Close to 6 of those things crouched just beyond the reach of our headlights beneath the first industrial monstrosity. The limp human figures opened their eyes to wave at me, pupils shining, moonlight white in the darkness. Their skin was torn, intestines all ripped out, their torsos ragged husks, barely supported by a mess of fractured bones. Yet they didn't seem to be in any pain, and they made no attempt to free themselves. They just swung there by their own bent necks and waved. They waved and smiled. The car lunged away from the scene and back out onto Bethesda Ridge Road. Just before the campsite passed out of view, the strange iron spider arched its signal dish head back and let out a piercing roar that crackled through the air like the tone of an overloaded synthesizer. Static hissed through my ears, hateful voices screamed in my head, and I slid down the back seat of the car into blackness. I woke up in a hospital of black oak, covered in soft white sheets, and diagnosed with a severe concussion. How something so simple could explain any of what I'd seen, no one cared to elaborate. But I didn't argue. Thankful to be alive and with a handmade get-well card from Andrea waiting on my nightstand, I didn't want to think about the thing in the woods. I just ate some Jell-O, read Andrea's card 15 times, and got in some nice, medicated, dreamless sleep. By the time James stopped by several hours later, he told me the entire department had turned out to search the campsite high and low, but found nothing. No destroyed camper, no smashed red pickup truck, not even the black SUV from New Wilderness. My patrol car was found parked in an empty turnoff just across the road from the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. With my Glock lying on the grass not 50 yards away, it was as if I dreamed the whole thing, with my only assurance that it had been real being my wild-eyed partner sitting in his narrow chair beside my hospital bed. After the hospital released me, I went straight to the station with James to report to the sheriff. Having searched the campsite with the rest of the officers, he didn't believe our story. But when the head of the New Wilderness Security reported one of his rangers missing, along with a vehicle, James and I seemed vindicated at last. That only made things worse. We were both ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements on pain of being fired and prosecuted should we refuse. Anyone who talked about the event outside the department was immediately suspended without pay, which ended up being several people. Both our body cameras and dash cams were confiscated, and neither James nor I ever saw the footage. Everyone who wasn't on the force accepted the sheriff's official narrative that I'd been hit by a stray bolt of lightning, which had given me a concussion. And just like that, we were silenced, just like the auburn-haired girl, despite my own predicament. I couldn't sleep very well after that. I kept seeing the girl's tear-streaked face in my dreams, Her eyes locked on mine as she was walking out of the station on the last day of her case. Unable to deal with it any longer, I took to the internet to search for any evidence as to what happened to her. Apparently, the auburn-haired girl quit her job at the New Wilderness Night Rangers a few weeks ago. But as to when and where she went afterward, no one can tell me. It took hours of searching, but I finally found a series of 3 entries on this site talking about a place called Tarpon Road. The first time I read it, I came close to breaking down in tears, and shame racked me from head to toe, along with fear. She was right. The auburn-haired girl was telling the truth all along, which meant that what I saw was real. Real and still out there. I don't know if she succeeded in stopping the creature she encountered, but whatever happened, it seems that now the floodgates have been opened. We get calls out to the New Wilderness area almost every other night. Most of them from the night rangers begging for armed backup. Strange events now occur both on and off the park, in good weather and bad, as if these things no longer have anything holding them back. 2 of our officers have been severely wounded in mysterious attacks, and the sheriff refuses to let us alert the state or federal government about them. James is thinking about quitting, and I'm admittedly on the fence about it. This is spiraling out of control, and yet I don't even know what on earth we're dealing with. I don't think anyone does. If you're reading this and you live anywhere near Black Oak or Collingswood, pack your bags and run. I don't care how long or how far. Just get as far from here as possible. For anyone else who lives outside Barron County or even outside Ohio, all I can say is keep your ear to the ground and listen for strange reports on the smaller regional news about incidents related to park rangers and police officers in the woods. Most likely anything will be taken down, discredited, or censored to keep the public from panicking, as I suspect the sheriff is trying to do. But if you're quick enough, save or print out the page before it gets removed, and you might just see the truth. The truth that keeps me up at night. The truth is that everyone here is too scared to voice out loud. There's something out there in the forest around the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. And whatever it is, it's spreading. The first time I spoke with someone who had been to hell, I was skeptical. The man, gaunt and twitching with eyes that didn't seem to blink, claimed he'd been dead for 17 minutes. When he spoke, it wasn't in the desperate, evangelistic way you might expect. His tone was clinical, as though he were reciting directions to a house I'd never visit. He described hell like a real place, not abstract, not spiritual, real, physical, awful. What haunted me wasn't the context of his story. It was his conviction. Over the years, I became obsessed. I tracked down others who'd had near-death experiences, focusing on those whose accounts hinted at something darker than bright lights and pearly gates. These weren't the comforting tales of loved ones or tunnels of warmth. They were accounts of torture, fear, and desperation. Umdir, Mason Grant. I study death, not in a spiritual sense, not in a metaphysical sense, but in a literal one. My work exists at the fringes of academia, dismissed by most as pseudoscience. But I've compiled something they can't ignore. A list. A set of rules gathered from first-hand accounts of those who claimed to have been to hell and returned. I don't know why I started writing them down. Maybe it was the pattern that kept surfacing across the stories. Or maybe I just wanted a way to make sense of the madness. Over the years, the list grew. Each new edition chipped away at my skepticism. By the time I reached the 10th rule, I was no longer a skeptic. I was a believer. The first person who gave me a rule was the Gaunt Man. His name was Paul, and he'd been clinically dead following a car accident. His voice was low, measured, and grim. Don't eat anything, he told me. Doesn't matter how hungry you get. Doesn't matter if it looks like food. It's not. When I pressed him, he described the food in hell. It wasn't rotten or grotesque as I'd imagined. Instead, it was enticing. Feasts of fruit, roasted meats, warm bread, and desserts that seemed to glow with some internal light. But the moment you eat, Paul said, you change. You lose something of yourself, he said. Your mind, it goes dull. Your will. It's like you stop caring about getting out. I think that's the point. They don't want you to leave. The second rule came from Maria, a nurse who had drowned in her pool one summer afternoon. Her voice was different from Paul's trembling, as though every word cost her something. Don't follow the voices, she whispered. Even if it sounds like someone, it's not them. Maria's hell was full of familiar voices. Her husband's laugh, her daughter's cry, her mother's soothing hum. The sounds came from somewhere unseen, luring her through the endless, jagged terrain. She never saw their faces, but she knew if she'd followed them, she wouldn't have made it back. The third rule came from a man named Travis. He had no business being alive. His heart had stopped for 23 minutes following a construction accident. His voice was hollow when he told me not to trust the light. Travis described the light as orbs that floated in the air, illuminating the dark expanse of hell. They would flicker and move, guiding him to what seemed like safety, only for the ground to give way beneath him, plunging him into pits of fire or worse after that. I started to notice patterns. Different people, different deaths, but similar rules. Don't look at the angels, one man said. They're not what you think. Never ask for help. They'll lie to you, a woman told me, trembling. Time doesn't work there. If you try to count the days, you'll lose your mind. It wasn't until I interviewed Daniel that I truly began to understand how terrifying hell could be. Daniel had been clinically dead for nearly an hour following a massive heart attack. His account was the most vivid and the most horrifying. He described hell as a sprawling, fractured wasteland. The sky, if it could be called that, was dark and oppressive, filled with swirling clouds that seemed to pulse like veins. The ground was jagged and uneven, with rivers of molten rock that burned without heat. The air was thick and choking, carrying the faint stench of decay. And the creatures, they're not demons, Daniel said. Not like in the movies. They're fallen angels. He described them as towering, twisted figures, their wings tattered and blackened, their faces a grotesque mockery of beauty. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes cold and pitiless. They don't just hurt you, Daniel said. They break you. They know every fear, every regret, every weakness, and they use it against you. The most chilling part of Daniel's account was his description of Lucifer. He's not a red devil with horns, Daniel said. He's beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. His face is perfect, but there's something in his eyes, something that makes you feel small. He doesn't speak, but when he looks at you, you understand. You understand that you don't matter, that you're nothing. Daniel's account added several rules to my list. Don't run, it draws their attention. Don't speak, they'll hear you. And don't stop moving, but don't go too fast either. Stay in the middle. By the time I compiled the 13th rule, I had a complete picture of hell, a place of endless torment, where the very fabric of the environment seemed designed to break the human spirit. The rules weren't just survival tips, they were lifelines. But something kept nagging at me. The people I interviewed had all returned. They'd all found a way back. That meant there was a way out. I asked Daniel how he escaped. He didn't answer at first. He just stared at me with hollow eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I didn't escape. They let me go. I pressed him for details, but he refused to elaborate. The most recent addition to my list came from a woman named Evelyn. She'd been dead for over 2 hours following a catastrophic allergic reaction. Her account was unlike any I'd heard before. They don't want you to leave, she said. But if you do, you have to bring something back. Evelyn wouldn't tell me what she meant. She just kept repeating the same phrase. You have to bring something back. So here's the full list compiled from years of interviews. Number 1, don't eat anything. Number 2, don't follow the voices. Number 3, don't trust the lights. Number 4, don't look at the angels. 5, never ask for help. 6, time doesn't work there. Don't try to count the days. 7, don't run. 8, don't speak. 9, don't stop moving, but don't go too fast. Stay in the middle. And number 10, they don't want you to leave, but if you do, you have to bring something back. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe it's because I've spent so long collecting these accounts that I feel like I need to document them. Or maybe it's because I'm starting to hear things. Sometimes they're faint, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Other times they're clear as day. They call. It's my mother's voice, my father's, my wife's. But I know better. I won't follow the voices. Not yet. Evelyn's words stuck with me more than any other account. You have to bring something back. She almost said it as if it were self-evident, a truth too obvious to warrant explanation. But when I pressed her, she only repeated herself, her eyes distant. She'd been dead for over 2 hours, longer than anyone I'd spoken to before. 2 hours in hell. Evelyn's voice was soft, but there was something cold and detached in her tone. She sat across from me, her pale hands trembling against the table. She didn't speak with the urgency of someone trying to warn others, or even the relief of someone who had escaped. No, Evelyn spoke as though she were still there, still navigating the horrors she described. They won't just let you leave, she said. Not without a trade. Something has to be given in return. What did you bring back? I asked her. Her eyes met mine for the first time since we started. I don't know, she said. I can't remember. But I didn't believe her. I pressed her again. If you don't remember, how do you know? I just know, she interrupted. Her voice sharp, her hand shot up the clutch at her throat as though silencing herself. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment she looked as if she might bolt from the room. I leaned back, giving her space. Evelyn didn't relax, but she continued speaking. When you leave, she said, you're not the same. Part of you stays behind. Part of it comes back with you. Maybe that's the trade. She paused, her eyes darting to the corner of the room as though something unseen was standing there. Or maybe it's something worse, she finished. Evelyn's rule haunted me in a way the others hadn't. Most of the people I'd spoken to were reluctant to share their stories, but their reluctance seemed rooted in fear or trauma. Evelyn's hesitance felt different. It wasn't fear, it was dread. Her words, you have to bring something back, played on a loop in my mind. What did she mean? What did she bring back? And what could be worse than the place she described? I returned to Daniel's account, hoping to find some clarity. Daniel's voice echoed in my memory, hollow and broken. They let me go. He hadn't elaborated, but now I wondered if his escape had been part of some larger scheme. Had they let him go because he brought something back? And if so, what? Daniel had described the fallen angels in vivid detail. He told me about their beauty, terrible and predatory, their faces uncomfortably perfect. They don't need to hurt you physically, Daniel had said. They can break you just by looking at you. He told me about the time he'd stumbled into one of them, how he'd frozen, unable to move or even breathe under its gaze. It didn't speak, he'd said. It just stared at me, and I felt everything at once. Every mistake, every regret, every sin I've ever committed. It showed me things I'd buried so deep I didn't even remember him. Daniel had fallen to his knees, unable to look away. I begged, he said. I begged for it to stop, but it didn't. It just smiled. He never explained how he escaped that encounter. When I asked, he only said I didn't escape it. It let me go. The idea that hell might have an agenda terrified me. What if these people weren't escaping at all? What if they were being released? I revisited Maria's rule next. Don't follow the voices. Maria's story had always unsettled me, but Evelyn's account had cast it in a new light. What if the voices weren't just a trap? What if they were part of the trade? Maria had described how the voices would echo through the jagged terrain of hell, always just out of reach. Sometimes they sounded like her daughter calling for help, other times like her husband, laughing as if he'd found a way out. They sounded so real, Maria had said. I knew they weren't, but I couldn't stop myself. I kept following them. It felt like they were pulling me. She'd walked for what felt like days, though she couldn't be sure. The time didn't work the same there. The ground beneath her feet had shifted constantly. One moment, a coarse black rock, the next a slick, fleshy surface that squelched with each step. The voices grew louder the longer she walked, until she reached the edge of a chasm. I couldn't see the bottom, she said. It was just endless. The voices had come from below, urging her to jump. I almost did, she admitted. It was like it wasn't just their voices. It was something inside me, something telling me to trust them. Maria had turned away at the last second, but she paid a price, a figure. She refused to describe it. Had appeared behind her, blocking her path. It didn't say anything, she said. It didn't have to. I could feel what it wanted. Maria wouldn't tell me how she escaped. Like Evelyn, she claimed she couldn't remember. I began to see a pattern in these accounts, a constant pull. The voices, the lights, the angels, they all seemed to lure people deeper into the abyss. But why? I fought back to Travis's rule. Don't trust the lights. Travis had described the lights as beautiful and hypnotic, like floating lanterns. They would flicker and drift, leading him through the darkness. At first, he thought they were guiding him to safety. But he quickly realized they were leading him in circles. It's like they were playing with me. He told me that every time he followed them, he ended up in the same place. But the more he followed, the harder it got to stop. The lights, he said, seemed to get brighter the longer he stared at them. They filled his mind with warmth and comfort, drowning out the fear and despair. It wasn't real, he'd said. None of it was real. But for a while, he wanted to believe it was. The more I analyzed these stories, the more I began to understand the rules weren't just about survival. They were about resistance. Hell wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a place of manipulation. It didn't just hurt you, it seduced you. Evelyn's rule, however, was different. It wasn't about resisting. It was about escaping the cost of doing so. I decided to contact Evelyn again, hoping she might give me more answers. When I called her, the line rang endlessly. Eventually, it disconnected. I drove to her home. The blinds were drawn and the house was dark. When I knocked, there was no response. I asked her neighbors if they'd seen her, and one of them, an elderly man with a weary expression, said he'd heard her talking to someone late at night. "Oh, she doesn't have visitors," he said, "but I heard her. She was arguing with someone, screaming, really, when I asked what she'd been screaming." He hesitated. Well, she kept saying, "I won't go back over and over." The next day, Evelyn's house was empty. Her car was still in the driveway, but she was gone. Her disappearance only deepened my obsession. What did she bring back and where had she gone? The answers were always just out of reach, like the voices Maria had described. And the more I searched, the more I felt the pull. At night I began to hear faint whispers. They sounded like Evelyn, like Daniel, like Maria, but sometimes they sounded like people I knew. They called. It was my wife's voice. She'd been gone for years, but it was unmistakable. I didn't follow the voices, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could resist. The more accounts I collected, the harder it became to ignore the thread that tied them all together. It wasn't just fear or suffering. It was the deliberate cruelty of hell's design. Each account painted a more horrifying picture. And I began to wonder if my fascination with these stories was itself part of some sinister trap. The first new account came from an old man named Robert, who'd been pronounced dead for 15 minutes after a massive stroke. "There's no quiet there," he began. "Even when it seems silent, it's not. The air itself makes noise, like screaming. It's constant everywhere." First I thought it was far away, but after a while I realized it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was inside my head. Robert described the landscape as a forest of fire. The trees were black and skeletal, their branches twisting into impossible shapes. Flames erupted intermittently, spreading from tree to tree like living things, but there was no heat. The fire burned cold, searing his flesh without leaving a mark. There was a path, he said. It wasn't marked, but I knew I was supposed to follow it. It felt like if I didn't, something worse would happen. He paused, but the path wasn't safe either. He described walking for what felt like hours, the cold fire licking at his skin. The screaming grew louder the further he went, and shapes began to emerge in the flames. They were human, or at least they had been, their faces contorted in agony, their bodies writhing as though they were trying to escape the flames, but they couldn't. They reached out to him, their mouths opening and closing in silent pleas. "I didn't touch him," Robert said. "I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to pull him out, but I knew. I knew if I touched him that I'd end up like them." He continued down the path, the cries of the burning figures fading into the background as he encountered something worse. The ground ahead had split open into a massive chasm, and from it rose a creature so large it blocked out what little light the fire provided. Its body was a grotesque blend of features. Dozens of eyes blinked in unison, covering its face, while its limbs ended in claws that clicked against the rocks as it moved. It didn't speak, Robert said, but it didn't need to. I could feel it in my head, prying into my thoughts. Showed me things I'd done, things I'd thought about doing but never have the guts to. Showed me how weak I was. When I asked how he escaped, Robert shook his head. I didn't escape. I don't think I was supposed to. I just woke up. Another account came from a woman named Nadine, who'd been dead for almost 40 minutes after an overdose. She was younger than most of the people I interviewed, but her voice carried the weight of someone much older. There's no direction there, she said. It's all chaos. You think you're going one way, but it loops back on itself. The terrain changes constantly. One minute it's fire, the next it's ice. She described how the temperature extremes weren't just physical, they were psychological. The ice didn't just freeze her skin, it froze her thoughts. The fire didn't just burn. It filled her with uncontrollable rage. There was this pit, she said. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't just fire. It was alive. It had faces all twisted together, screaming and laughing at the same time, Nadine said. She was forced to walk along the edge of the pit, the ground crumbling beneath her feet with every step. She could see figures climbing out of the fire, their bodies charred and broken. But they didn't seem human. Their mouths stretched too wide, filled with teeth that seemed to shift and multiply. They tried to grab me, she said. They didn't want to pull me in. They wanted to tear me apart. Her voice faltered, and for a moment she looked like she might be sick. I don't know how I got away. I just ran, and then I was back. James was next. He'd been clinically dead for 10 minutes following a gunshot wound. His account was the most vivid and disturbing I'd ever heard. They want you to suffer, he said, his eyes staring past me as he spoke. Not just physically, you know. They want to rip you apart from the inside. James described waking up in a barren wasteland. The ground cracked and bleeding. Yes, bleeding. The earth itself oozed a thick, dark liquid that smelled like rot and sulfur. The sky was a swirling mass of black and red, with occasional flashes of light that revealed monstrous silhouettes. I wasn't alone, he said. There were others, people like me. At least I think there are people. They didn't look human anymore. The figures were hunched and broken, their limbs twisted. Their faces were blank, no eyes or mouths, but they moved as though they could see. They didn't attack me, James said. They just followed me. Everywhere I went, they were there watching, waiting. He described how the terrain changed constantly. One moment, he was walking through a field of jagged rocks that cut his feet with every step. The next, he was wading through a river of molten metal that burned without killing him. There was no way out, he said. No matter where I went, I ended up back where I started. At one point, James said he saw a figure in the distance, tall, skeletal, with wings that stretched across the horizon. The figure didn't move, but its presence filled him with a fear so overwhelming he could barely breathe. It wasn't like the others, he said. It didn't need to chase me or hurt me, just knowing it was there. That was enough. When I asked if he thought the figure was Lucifer, James hesitated. I don't know, he said. Maybe. But if it was, then he doesn't need to do anything. Just being near him is horrible. Each new account added to the growing tapestry of horror I'd been piecing together. The fire, the ice, the creatures, they weren't just random elements. They were calculated, deliberate. Hell wasn't just a place of torture. It was a machine designed to break the soul. I began to wonder if the people I interviewed were telling me the whole truth. Evelyn's cryptic warning echoed in my mind. You have to bring something back. Had they all brought something back with them? And if so, I still didn't know what it was. The rules felt less like a guide, and more like a map, one that led to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find, but I couldn't stop yet. The accounts I collected stayed with me, pressing against the corners of my mind like a swelling tide. Each story added a new dimension to the horrors of hell, and each made the world around me feel more fragile over time. I noticed something I hadn't anticipated, something I hadn't prepared for. You see, the more I listened to these stories, the harder it became to find peace. I started to hear things, faint whispers in the dead of night. They grew louder, more insistent. They called, and again it sounded like my wife. My father, people I'd lost, but their presence didn't comfort me. It filled me with dread. I'd lie in bed, unable to sleep, the hum of my refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock growing louder in the stillness. Every creak in the house felt like a threat. Every sound became part of the chorus of noise that seemed intent on drowning me. C.S. Lewis once wrote about the very essence of hell being noise. I hadn't thought much about it before, but those words haunted me. The stories I'd collected, the people I'd spoken to, all of them described hell as a place of relentless chaos. Screams, flames, wailing, and voices. It was never quiet. There was no space to think, no room to reflect. It wasn't until I sat alone in my office late one night, staring at the stack of transcriptions, that I realized the connection. My own world had become louder the deeper I delved into these stories. The distractions I once relied on, music, television, and my smartphone, had become part of the noise. I reached for my phone instinctively, scrolling through news articles and emails as though searching for something that would quiet the unease, but the screen only added to the hum in my head. Notifications chimed, headlines screamed for attention, and somewhere beneath it all, the whispers persisted. It was my wife's voice again. I dropped the phone and turned off the TV. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was oppressive. My ears strained against it, searching for sounds that weren't there. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the whispers faded and I began to test it. I turned off my phone more often, spending long stretches of time without the comforting hum of podcast or music. I stopped watching TV before bed. Instead, I sat in silence, listening to the faint rustle of leaves outside my window, or the distant chirp of crickets. At first, it felt unbearable. My mind raced with intrusive thoughts, dredging up fears and regrets I tried to bury. But slowly, something changed. The whispers stopped entirely. The weight on my chest lifted, and for the first time in months, I slept without having nightmares. It became a ritual. Every morning I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. I could hear the birds calling to one another. I didn't bring my phone with me. I didn't read the news or check my email. I just sat, letting the quiet fill me at first. It felt like a small act of rebellion against the chaos of modern life. But as the days passed, I realized it was more than that. It was protection. The people I'd interviewed had faced the worst horrors imaginable, and every one of them had described hell as a place of relentless noise. That wasn't a coincidence. Noise wasn't just a symptom of hell. It was its essence. It was overwhelming. It was distracting. It drowned out everything that made a person human. In the silence, I found clarity. I began to understand that the noise in my life, both external and internal, wasn't just a byproduct of the modern world. It was something darker, something insidious. The more I embraced silence, the more I saw the world for what it was. The constant bombardment of notifications, advertisements, social media posts, all the nonsense in media wasn't harmless. It was a kind of noise designed to keep us distracted, to keep us from thinking too deeply. I thought back to Evelyn's rule. You have to bring something back. I wondered if the noise was what she'd brought back, if it was what any of them had brought back. Maybe hell wasn't just a place you went to when you died. Maybe it was a state of being, too. A relentless cacophony that crept into the world through those who had seen it. One evening, as the sun set and the sky faded into twilight, I sat on my porch and listened to the wind. It carried with it the faint scent of rain and the soft rustle of leaves. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, but it wasn't a voice. It was the sound of the world settling into itself, a natural rhythm that had existed long before the distractions of modern life. I thought about the people I'd interviewed, about the horrors they described. I thought about the rules. Don't eat, don't run, don't trust the lights. But the most important rule wasn't the one they'd given me. It was one I discovered on my own. The silence wasn't just a reprieve. It was a shield. In the absence of noise, I could hear myself think. I could feel the presence of the world around me, and I could feel the presence of something else too. Something good. The more I embraced silence, the less afraid I became. Hell was noise. Constant, unrelenting noise, and the only way to protect myself from it was to embrace the stillness. I stopped looking for new accounts. The stack of transcriptions sat untouched on my desk. It just gathered dust. I didn't need them anymore. I found what I was searching for, though it wasn't the answer I'd expected. No. Every morning I sit on the porch with my coffee, and I just listen. The birds sing their songs, and the world hums with a quiet, peaceful rhythm. I don't think about hell anymore. I just sit in silence, and in the quiet I find everything I need. Where do dead monsters go? Well, in Baltimore, they end up at the museum. I just started as the new assistant at the Baltimore Earth Sciences Museum. Today I got to work with Dr. Jackson, who is known as the best cryptozoologist in the world. And unlike the average cryptid hunter who goes out into the woods looking for monsters, we have proof. But to get this job, I needed to be personally selected by Dr. Mortimer Jackson himself. And he doesn't just pick anybody. No, if you want to get hired by Dr. Jackson, you need to have some special experience in his special field. I enrolled in the university he teaches at and transferred classes just to get him as my professor. I turned in papers citing articles that should have been buried. I name-dropped experts that had worked on his controversial side projects. And when we did finally have a chance to talk in private, I showed him the evidence that I've been hiding the past 15 years. The moment he watched the video footage I gave him, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was the real deal. He saw that I knew just as well as he did what was out there, and that I was just as committed as he was to studying it. He didn't say much at the time, but a week later he offered me the job. I said yes the moment he asked. Dear. Jackson greeted me when I arrived at the museum. He led me to the back, past all the exhibits on display. You've got initiative, Nick. I like that. Reminds me of myself when I was younger, he said. Dr. Jackson's official title is Professor of Biology at the University of Baltimore. In that regard, he's fairly respected. He mainly studies zoology nowadays. He mostly just teaches and works at the museum. To be honest, sir, I just want to understand what's out there. I've always tried to, I said, and I had the scars to prove it. You would not believe how many cryptids get spotted on the other side of barbed fences. So do I. And please, just Morty is fine, he said, giving a warm smile as we made our way to an elevator. He scanned a key card before it opened. So you're a smart young man. Exactly how much do you know about our side project down here? His tone shifted to something more serious. Not much, I admitted. I know you've got an interest in cryptids, and I have heard some rumors. Rumors? Dr. Jackson asked, hitting a button in the elevator as it took us down into the basement about proof. Said. I noticed a slight twinkle in his eye. Wait, that can't be true, can it? You don't actually have them. I couldn't believe it. Specimens, he asked. Why, yes, we do. Several. My heart skipped a beat as the elevator doors opened. Would you like to see one? He asked, and I could not have said yes fast enough. The museum basement looked pretty normal at first. Clean linoleum holes, fluorescent lights, and beige walls. It looked like any other office space, although it was quieter down there than it was anywhere else in the museum. I wondered if Dr. Jackson and I were the only two down here. You know, when I first started working for the museum, I never dreamed that I'd actually be able to study these creatures, I heard him say. After the things I've seen, I've always kept an open mind, but I also maintained a healthy dose of optimism too. Then, about 10 years after we came across our first body, well, everything changed. Where did you get it? I asked. A local coroner. Funnily enough, he began, it had been found during a search and rescue. Some hikers got lost in the woods while they were looking for it. They found this. They thought it was human at first, but at a closer look, there was just so much about it that, well, wasn't. So they called us to help figure out exactly what it was. He led me through a door and into a large room that kind of looked like a morgue. He put on a pair of gloves and went over to the large set of specimen cabinets that dominated the far wall, the sheer number of them. It made me pause. I began to wonder just how many of these creatures they'd found. Dr. Jackson unlocked the cabinets before carefully opening one of the drawers. He picked a larger one and slid out slowly, almost reverently. It revealed several pieces of white bone, arranged to show the skeleton of something that looked human. And yet it also clearly wasn't. For one thing, it was too big to be human. The skull was the wrong shape, looking more like a cross between a gorilla and a cat. I stared at it in quiet disbelief as I tried to process this. All my life, the only proof I'd had of these things existing was the video footage I'd shown Dr. Jackson. The grainy cell phone footage I'd shot on the night of the accident when my sister died, and now here in front of me was concrete proof. Real bones, a real skeleton. All I could do was stare briefly. I wondered what had killed a monster like this. Dr. Jackson looked over at me and cracked a knowing grin. Incredible, isn't it? He asked. Once we started examining it, it became very clear that this specimen didn't belong to any species we had on record. After ruling out every other possibility of what it could be, we were forced to accept that what we had here were the remains of an entirely new creature. And you've had this for 10 years, I said. You've had a body for 10 years and you've never published it. Bodies, Dr. Jackson corrected. By my count, we've identified roughly 15 different species, some closer to humans than others, some close enough where the average person might not be able to know they're talking to something that isn't human. That's actually part of why we've been reluctant to officially publish anything. The humanoid passing ones seem more dangerous. They evolved to look like us after all. And if our hypothesis is right, they did so to feed on us. He moved to a different drawer, and after a moment, pulled it open. This one contained a collection of skulls, most of which looked human, except for the teeth. Their teeth were too long, too sharp. Exposing these creatures could be very dangerous for a number of reasons. Dr. Jackson said, at best, we turn ourselves into a laughingstock, even with hard evidence. The scientific community would take time to accept our findings without an in-depth investigation, and while they're doing that, we'd be painting a target on our backs. I doubt these creatures would appreciate being exposed to the public. Then, of course, there's the question of what would happen to these creatures if we did. Judging by how rare these bodies are, it's likely there's not a lot of them out there, and their survival is heavily reliant on the fact that nobody knows they exist. Changing that might put them at risk. People are admittedly a little bit stupid. Tell everyone that monsters exist, and a lot of them will be all too happy to start up witch hunts. I nodded with understanding. Yes, these creatures were dangerous, but it'd be a shame if they were all hunted to extinction before we really got to even know them. That would be such a waste. Dr. Jackson continued to stare down at the skulls a bit more, before closing the drawer. Excuse me, I'm starting to ramble, he said. My point is, there's too much that could go wrong. So a while back, the rest of the team and I thought it'd be better to keep our research quiet for now, study them in private, and learn all we can before deciding what to do. Have you ever encountered one that's still alive? I asked. Oh, not yet, I'm afraid, but I'd always hoped that one day we'd change that. He closed the drawer with the skeleton of the first specimen on it and locked the cabinet again. Well, come along now. I should show you where you'll be working. I nodded, and I followed him. The rest of my day was much less exciting. I met one of the other members of our small team. Her name was Heidi. She was another assistant working under one of Dr. Jackson's colleagues. I'll mostly be working with her since Dr. Jackson and the others have very busy schedules. She seemed nice enough. Actually, she reminded me a little bit of Marcia. Maybe it was something about the way she wore her blonde hair or the oversized, cozy-looking sweater she was wearing. I don't know. My sister once owned a similar sweater. She seemed like no nonsense. She didn't really bother with small talk. Every time we spoke, it was pretty straight to business. I think the longest exchange we had was when she walked me through the emergency security measures. It's easy. In the event of an emergency, you can initiate a lockdown from your laptop. Really, all it does is shut off the elevator, lock the fire exit, and call police, she explained. Have there been a lot of emergencies? I asked. Nope, but Dr. Jackson insisted we have something just in case anything were to happen. He pulled some strings to get this all set up. He's even got a couple of officers he knows on standby, but I've been here for over a year now, and nothing's ever happened, she said with a shrug. Well, that was reassuring. When Dr. Jackson needed to leave for classes, I was left with Heidi. She was the one who taught me the finer details of our job, stuff like how to assess any evidence we receive, how to categorize it, and how to file reports for DR. Jackson on items of interest. Now, I'll admit, these things were not as fun as staring at the bones of an actual monster. But it did feel good to be reviewing other evidence for the existence of these creatures. It felt validating. For 15 years, I've been trying to understand what happened that night. I pored over the evidence, comparing them to my own research notes. And slowly, I started putting the pieces together. I still have nightmares about the accident. I was only 12 at the time. My family was taking a short vacation at a cabin up north. I just got my first cell phone around that time, and I'd spent most of the trip playing with it. I take photos and videos just because I could. I've still got most of them, actually. That Sunday, we were supposed to spend a day driving back home, but the car battery died. Dad needed to have it towed to a garage to get it changed. So by the time we finally hit the road again, it was almost dark. We were still deep in the middle of nowhere when night fell. The world outside of our windows was completely black. You couldn't even see the trees anymore. I remember Mom said we could stop off at a motel. She thought it was too dangerous to be driving through the back roads after dark. But Dad, well, he was stubborn. He said everything would be fine. And then we hit that deer. I've been on my phone at the time. I've been filming her when the deer ran across the road. You can't see it on the footage, but you can hear my mom screaming about it before everything goes blurry. The video doesn't really show what happened next, but I remember enough about it. To fill in the blanks, Dad swerved to avoid the deer, but he was going too fast and we ended up hitting it with the side of the car before skidding off the road entirely. The car rolled as it went down an incline, and then everything was silent. In the video, you can hear my dad moving first, asking if everyone's okay. Then you can hear him fighting to get out of the car. Before going to get me and Marcia in the footage, I can see myself picking up my phone again about 10 minutes after the accident. Dad was helping me out of the car by then. It's hard to see anything clearly in the video, the forest around us. It's way too dark. The only time anything is visible is when the camera focuses on the patch of trees lit up by the headlights. You can still hear everything, though. You can hear my family trying to get their bearings after the accident. You can hear my mother calling for help on her phone. And you can hear the movement in the trees as something gets closer. At some point, I realized my camera was still on, so I started to film the wreckage. Don't ask me why I did that. I don't really remember why. But in the footage, you can see Marcia and the rest of my family standing in the headlights. You can hear my mom on the phone, and you can hear the thud as the thing in the dark moved closer. Marcia sees it first. In the video, you can see the look on her face when she realized that something followed us down there. It's true. Genuine horror. She starts screaming and stumbles back. And then my mom starts screaming. And then my dad. I remember seeing it too. It was just a shadow in the dark, massively tall and skinny, humanoid yet inhuman. It was hard to get a feel for the shape of it, but I could see its eyes shining in the darkness. I remember turning the camera to look at it, and you can just barely see those eyes in the grainy footage. Two burning torches in the dark. I remember the way that thing hissed before sprinting towards us. And as soon as it did, panic took over completely. Dad was closest to Mom. I remember he grabbed her, pulling her away. You can hear him in the video, screaming for me and Marcia too, yelling our names, telling us to get away. I remember scrambling back into the shadows. I remember Marcia running off. You could see her turning to run in the footage, taking off into the trees, and you can see the creature following her. For just a few seconds, you can see it. Some pale, vaguely humanoid thing with long, spindly limbs running into the light, then taking off into the woods after her. For just a few frames, the camera wasn't shaking, and you can see it clearly. And that's really the last thing you can see. The camera goes dark, and all you can hear is the second of me running and the sound of Marcia screaming. After a few minutes of darkness, the camera runs out of storage and the recording ends. But in my memories, I can still hear her screaming. She screamed for our mom and our dad, and then there was silence. The police would find her body about 20 feet from the scene of the accident. They concluded that her injuries were consistent with a bear attack. Their theory was that a bear had come to investigate the accident and went after Marcia in time. My parents accepted that too. I can't help but resent them for that. We all saw it. We all know it was a monster that took my sister. I forced them to look at the footage over and over again to confirm it. I made them keep looking at those few frames until they threatened to set my phone on fire. And that was when I had to find answers on my own. I didn't know what it was, but I needed to know. I needed to understand. I knew I should hate it, but hating it seemed like a waste of energy. Learning about it, though, understanding it, I don't know, that seemed like a better use of my time. If I could understand this thing, I might be able to make her death mean something. My sister was never coming back, but that thing was still out there, and I have to admit the work has been fulfilling. For the next few days, I began moving all my research from my dorm to the museum. I brought in boxes filled with books, maps, and printouts. I study as many of the specimens as I can in between sorting through samples set in by the public. Most of the evidence we get is bogus. It's either blatant hoaxes or misidentified animals, usually animals with severe mange or some other illness. Other times, people submit blurry or distant photos of something. There's not enough there to really say what it is, but buried beneath all the noise are a few genuine photographs and videos. I've never seen a few creatures similar to the one I saw the night that she died. After so many years, I don't know, I finally feel like I'm exactly where I belong. And there's something else too. Heidi tells me we're scheduled to get a new specimen soon. A couple of hunters shot it that afternoon and contacted one of Dr. Jackson's colleagues, Dr. I've seen the photos they've sent us. Now, it's hard to say with any certainty, but what these hunters found, it looked really close to the creature I saw on the night that she died. This time, we're not getting a pile of bones. We are getting something a lot fresher. That is one autopsy. I would have loved to be a part of it. The corpse arrived a few days later. Seeing it in person was surreal. The photographs, videos, and bones don't tell you how wrong these creatures are. And on top of that, the disturbing way they used to be human keywords used to be. Whether or not it still counts as human now, I really can't say. It still looks human for the most part, but there's so much off about it. What's left? It's something that you can't really consider as a person anymore. The skin, well, it was too pale for a start. It was too tight in some places and too saggy in others. The limbs were skinny to the point where they seemed elongated. But even with how skinny they looked, its arms were still covered in dense muscle. Its hands looked more like claws. The fingertips looked like they were chewed on until the exposed bone formed sharp talons. And then, of course, there was the face. It looked like a human face, but only just enough to be recognizable. The skull underneath. It was definitely human, but the eyes were sunken and beady. The lips and cheeks were torn and scarred, as if this creature had mutilated its own mouth in order to better eat, as if all that mattered to it was to shovel meat into its jaws. Looking at its mouth, I imagined meat was its primary diet. It still had human teeth, but I could see the bits of rotten flesh stuck between them. The sight of it made my stomach turn. The memory of my sister's screams flashed through my mind, and I forced myself not to think about it. I looked away from the corpse. Before checking the notes that had come with it, Heidi had left them on the table beside the body for me to review. It had been shot by a pair of local hunters, brothers named Adam and Joey Winslow. They included a statement on how they'd found it. They had gone out on a hunting trip one morning. Joey had spotted a buck and taken a shot. They managed to hit the deer, but not enough to kill it. It had run off, and the brothers followed. They figured the buck wouldn't make it far, but this thing got to it first. It was just hunched over the animal, teeth digging into its throat. The creature was trying to drag the deer away. It hissed as it saw the hunters and was ready to attack. The Winslows opened fire before it could move. They said it kept twitching even after they shot 3 more rounds in it, so they didn't stop until they put a few more in its head. Even then, the brothers swore that the damn thing might still be alive. I couldn't imagine how this thing could have been breathing. I looked down at the body, examining the bullet holes, and for a moment I thought I saw its chest move. But no, after all the damage it's taken, it had to be dead. Nothing on God's green earth should have been able to walk away from 3 rifle rounds to the skull. I figured I'd get my answer when DR. Jackson and DR. Vern got around to examining the specimens themselves. Heidi mentioned they'd be coming by that evening to conduct an autopsy. I would have liked to sit in on that, but I'm still a student at the university after all. I had homework to worry about. But with any luck, I'll be able to learn a little more about what DR. Jackson and Vern would find tomorrow. They usually record their autopsies. I can't remember the last time I felt this excited to go to work. I wonder if I could get a video copy for myself. The next morning, I came into the museum to find that the specimen was no longer in the exam room we had left it in. Dr. Jackson must have moved it after the autopsy. There was some blood on the exam table that the corpse had been on, as well as some blood on the floor. They must have forgotten to clean it up. Heidi was already in, typing away at her laptop. I went straight to collect any notes that Dr. Jackson and Vern had left about the autopsy, but I couldn't find anything in the room. So I asked Heidi if they'd already been filed away. If there's no hard copy in a room with a specimen, they might have emailed them to you, she said. I went over to my laptop to check my inbox, but there was nothing there. Hunno, nothing there. You happen to know what room they moved the specimen to? I'll check there, I said. But the moment I said that, she froze. I could see the gears in her head turning. What do you mean they moved the specimen? She repeated. Oh, well, it wasn't in the room, I said. She jumped out of her seat then and bolted down the hall to the exam room. She threw open the door and stared quietly at the pool of blood on the metal table. I could see the color slowly drain from her face. Heidi, they had to have moved it. That thing was dead. I mean, you saw it. It was dead. She didn't respond. She just stood in silence. And then she took off to one of the other exam rooms, pushing open the door to peek inside before quickly moving on. She went through all 6 of them. All of them were empty. The specimen was gone. But that thing was dead, I thought. That thing had taken 3 bullets to the head. It was supposed to be dead. It looked dead. Didn't make any sense for this thing to have gotten up and just walked away. Nothing should be able to do that. The moment she saw that the other rooms were empty, Heidi took off towards the office again. She got her phone out and ran. I followed her. I locked the door behind us and she dialed DR. Jackson's number. She paced uneasily as she waited for him to pick up. A moment later, the muted ringing of his phone echoed through the halls. We stood silently, and then slowly her eyes shifted upwards towards the ceiling as we realized where the ringing was coming from. She stared at the ceiling tiles, her breathing growing more erratic as she did. Shut down the elevator, she said. Shut down the elevator right now. I scrambled for my computer, heart racing as I opened up the security program. I clicked on it, and a notification flashed up on my computer screen, telling me that the elevator had just been shut down and the fire exit was now locked. I looked over at Heidi, and I saw her running over to a cabinet on the far side of the room. She opened it with trembling hands. Then she took out a small metal box. What is that? I asked. She never answered me, but I got my answer all the same when I saw the revolver nestled inside. And I understood then why it was there. Dr. Jackson was a lot more paranoid than he let on. Heidi's hands trembled. I had to help her load the gun. She just stared at me. Wide-eyed and anxious as I did so, once I'd managed to load it, I looked up towards the ceiling. Dr. Jackson's phone was still ringing. Heidi shifted uneasily. "Do you think it's up there?" she asked. I didn't know. I hesitated for a few moments. I considered whether or not to fire a warning shot, just to see if anything happened. I mean, if something was up there, maybe a warning shot might scare it off, or it might reveal itself. It also might attack then, I thought. I closed my eyes for a moment. The memory of Marcia went through my mind, and for just a single horrible moment, I imagined Heidi screaming the way Marcia had. In a lot of ways, she was still a stranger to me, but I wasn't going to let her die that way. I've always been willing to risk everything for my research, but I don't gamble with other people's lives. No, I wasn't going to let her die. I wasn't going to let either of us die. I'd come too far. I took a deep breath and I fired a warning shot. Heidi jumped. She stared up at the ceiling as the phone went quiet for a moment. Everything was still. There was no sound, no movement, no indication that the creature was even up there. I stared up at the ceiling before grabbing a nearby chair and pulling it under one of the ceiling tiles. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm taking a look," I said. The longer I thought about it, the harder I found it to believe that this thing was just sitting pretty on top of the ceiling tiles. Logically, it should have reacted to the shot. I had to see for myself. I climbed up the chair and I carefully lifted one of the ceiling tiles. Heidi stood beneath me, watching as I peeked into the crawl space. In the dim light, I could see a shape. I stared at it, but it didn't move. I reached into my pocket for my phone, turned the flashlight, and then I shone it inside and in the light. I saw the twisted remains of Dr. Mortimer Jackson staring at me with lifeless eyes. Beside him was the body of who I can only assume was Dr. Vern. That creature. It hid the bodies. Despite my horror, I couldn't help but be impressed by its intelligence. I pulled back away from the tiles, and I stumbled off the chair. I think the look on my face told Heidi everything she needed to know. She glanced up at the ceiling in horror before deciding it was better off. She didn't see it. "Did you see it?" she asked. No, if it's up there, it's nowhere near us now." We sat in silence for a few moments, listening for any sign that the creature was nearby, but we didn't hear anything. Not until Heidi's phone rang. The police had finally arrived. Heidi and I remained in the office while they conducted their search, although in the end they found nothing but the bodies. They were the ones that had been stuffed into the space above the ceiling tiles, and the two joggers who'd been killed on a trail near the museum. The two of us gave our statements to the officers. Afterward, she chose to stay at a friend's house. I don't know if she's coming back tomorrow. Me? I went home to get the things I would need. You see, I've been following police reports. There's a lot more reported animal attacks around here that just don't add up. Torn up hikers, strange animal prints, creatures that are too human to be bears. Since we lost our only live specimen, it's only right I bring back another one. So I'm putting the word out. If you see anything weird around these woods, you know where to find me. I have a superstitious mom. She was always the sort of person who adhered to silly, nonsensical rules, like not stepping on cracks or tossing salt over your shoulder if you spill it. Rules that may or may not even have had any true origin or reason. Things that people follow blindly, even though we all know there are absolutely no consequences for breaking, but follow anyway. One of my earliest memories actually involves my mom nervously demanding that I hold my breath until she says otherwise. I don't remember where we were coming home from late at night, but Mom and Dad were in the front seat and I was in a car seat, half asleep. Then she said urgently, "Jason, hold your breath." She'd smacked Dad on the arm. "You too, please, just do it." Then she gulped in a big breath and held it as we traveled down the foggy night road. Once she released her breath and said, "Okay," my dad laughed. He was used to her superstitions and normally just went along with it to make her happy. "Why'd I have to hold my breath, Mommy?" I'd asked. Mom swiveled in her seat to look at me. "Because we were getting ready to pass a graveyard." "Didn't you see it?" I hadn't seen it, which I was glad about. It probably would have spooked me out. I shook my head. "Well, anytime you pass a graveyard at night, you must hold your breath until you make it safely past." I frowned and wrinkled my nose. You do? Why? I asked. She gave me a serious look. Son, you just do, that's why. To be safe. That's why it's so important to always pay attention to your surroundings. Sometimes I think back to that and I laugh a little to think it's important to pay attention to your surroundings for the sole purpose of knowing when you're passing a graveyard. It's sort of funny. Do you know what it takes to get hired at a graveyard? Like, as a job? Well, actually, in my case, it took exactly no effort. It took my dad drinking coffee with the city workers at the local diner on Sunday mornings and volunteering me when they said that they needed a part-time groundskeeper. I didn't particularly care for the idea, but I did like money, and spring had come, so the weather was getting pretty nice. So I guess I didn't mind too much when I started working Monday, Wednesday, Fridays after school, and Saturday mornings at our town's small cemetery. I'd go and prune bushes, pick up fallen tree limbs, cut the grass, weed, and eat carefully around tombstones. I was a teenager, but that was a pretty nice kid. I felt respectful of the place's residents, and I treated the grounds with proper reverence. I even came to enjoy the job. Sometimes when I came, there would have been a funeral at some point earlier in the day. The casket would be lowered into the ground, and the mourner was gone by the time I arrived. But the grave would be uncovered with a pile of dirt still next to the chasm in the earth, waiting to be filled in. Or I would arrive on a Saturday to find a grave or two dug, a deep, perfect rectangle awaiting a funeral later in the day, yet to have a casket lowered in. I hated to admit it, but I always liked the smell of the freshly dug graves. It generated a natural, earthy scent. Sometimes I felt the graveyard smelled old and stale, and also a little like an old lady due to the mixture of flower arrangements, both growing and wilting away. It was probably all in my head. I supposed it was normal to just think that a graveyard smelled odd. Well, because a graveyard was an odd place. Nonetheless, I liked the ageless smell of the fresh-turned earth. I never saw anybody digging the graves. Month after month passed, and I never so much as caught a glimpse of anyone doing it. I also wondered why the graves were left open after a funeral, why the gravedigger didn't come and fill it in right away. It seemed sort of eerie, and maybe a safety hazard. Normally, I was alone in the graveyard during my short shifts, but once in a while I would cross paths with another city worker who'd come in on some sort of errand or task. The guy who sort of ran the graveyard, if that's a thing, was a grumpy old guy who never had much to say. One Saturday morning, I asked him about the gravedigger. "Hey George," I asked, "how come you never see the guy who digs the grave around here?" They were in a small office next to the main mausoleum, and George's eyes shot up from the stack of papers he was shuffling through. "What kind of question is that?" He grunted. I shrugged. "I don't know. Just curious, I guess." George gave me a sharp look, staring at me for a second. "He works at night." He finally barked. "Oh, always. Like he never needs a night off to work in the day instead." He was glowering at me then. "Boy, it's a job for the nighttime. Now, if you ain't got nothing to do, I reckon you should just skedaddle." So from then on, I got sort of obsessed with the gravedigger. Thinking of it as a job that had to be done strictly at night just made it all the more strange and alluring to me. Who was this person? What had drawn him to this sort of work? What was he like if he'd been spending a lot of time at night, all alone, digging graves? What did he look like? Why? Why on earth did he do this? I talked to my friend Jacob about it. I told him one day about all the open graves that popped up in the morning time, what grouchy old George had told me about the night gravedigger, and my general fascination with this person. Jacob stared at me blankly. "Dude, you're nuts." I laughed. "Seriously, I think working in a graveyard has gotten to you. I need to tell your parents to make you quit that job." I chuckled again. "Nah, it's a surprisingly okay job. Nothing creepy or like crazy making has ever happened." I bugged out my eyes and lurched at him playfully. He ducked out of my way. Seriously, though, I continued. "Don't you ever think about what certain jobs are like? Like being a garbage collector or an NFL football player. Those are two really random selections. But yeah, I guess I kind of think a lot about law enforcement. I might like to go that route when I'm older." See, that's exactly what I mean. You think about jobs and wonder what the job is like, and maybe about what sorts of people do certain jobs, right? Jacob shrugged. Yeah, I guess. Seems legit. So yeah, then you get what I'm saying. You're already thinking about a law enforcement career. What I want to know is who wakes up one day and goes, boy, I really feel passionate about pursuing a career in the field of digging graves? Jacob cracked up laughing. Okay, yeah, I guess I see your point. So the guy never comes around except late at night? There's literally no way you could get to meet him. I don't think so. So I guess you have to go there at night then. I frowned. There is no way I could get out late at night unnoticed. And anyway, it's illegal to go to a cemetery past dark if you don't work there. Dude, you do work there, Jacob informed, rolling his eyes. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be my time to work, so it wouldn't be okay for me to be there. And look, anyway, don't you think it might kind of freak him out if someone just showed up late at night? Jacob thought about it for a minute. Well, then, I guess your only option if you really wanted to get a look at this guy would be to install a camera. What? I asked. Sure, just a little motion-activated camera, like a Ring doorbell or something. Just put it somewhere that it most likely won't be noticed. It'll just kick on when someone moves near it. That sounds sort of stalkery. Jacob shrugged. You sound sort of stalkery, dude. Wouldn't that be a pretty sketch, though? Like, don't you think we could get in trouble for this? We? Jacob asked with a laugh. I mean, I suppose you could get in trouble, but the trick would be to leave it somewhere low-key and then get rid of it once you're satisfied. And if someone finds it and bothers to trace who it belongs to, which, come on, they probably won't, then you could just make up something about being worried about vandals and trying to do community service. Whoa, great idea, I said. You know, you have sort of a criminal mind for someone who wants to be a cop. Huh, well, maybe that'll make me an excellent cop. Within the next week, we got in a hold of a small motion-activated camera and set it up to notify my phone when it was triggered. I happened to know that a funeral was scheduled for that Saturday, so I planted the camera where it would be definitely triggered, near the site of a new grave. Jacob planned to spend the night at my house that night so we could finally see this mysterious gravedigger. I was super excited, but then I felt really bad for being excited about anything involving a funeral. We spent the evening playing video games and eating pizza. We periodically checked the camera from my phone, which could be done even if no motion activated it. We repeatedly saw just the still quiet gathering gloom of the evening falling over the cemetery and nothing more. It got later and later though, and eventually we both fell asleep watching horror movies. The gentle jingling sound of chimes woke me up. It was the alert I'd selected for when the camera was activated. I sprung awake and had to shake Jacob since he was apparently less enthused about this project and didn't want to wake on his own. As I woke my friend, I fumbled to push the buttons to call up the camera on my phone. Jacob rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and we both settled to watch. There was a bank of graves visible, and further in the distance behind them, the stone door to the mausoleum could be seen. That, as it turned out, was the motion that had triggered the camera. I pushed a green button on the screen which activated sound so that I could hear as well as see what was happening before our eyes. The heavy stone door, only meant to open on very rare occasions, was sliding open. Not only was it odd to see the door open at all, as far as I knew, there was a special tool required to open it. The door scraped noisily against the stone floor. A murder of crows nearby was roused by the noise and fluttered upwards in a flurry of shrieking caws. It seemed like eternity before the door finally finished its slow open, and what stood there in the dingy, dusty glow made me drop the phone. What the crap is that? Jacob cried. We both scrambled to get the phone back to watch as the thing inside made its way out. It had a slow, shuffling gait, seemingly to drag one leg and haul its bony shoulders forward as though it was walking against a hard wind. Its body was rail-thin, almost skeletal, with tattered old-fashioned clothing hanging from its frail frame. The skin on the face was sagging and paper-thin, but the worst part was that there were holes in various places where you could see clean through to the bone beneath. Its hair was white and wispy, all but a few wiry tufts missing. It had gaping black sockets, where I should have been, but instead only empty darkness pointed out toward the night. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles per minute. Jacob punched my arm. Dude, What the heck is happening right now? My wide eyes remained glued to the nightmare depicted on the screen. I have no idea. The thing moved forward, and after an eternity, it finally reached the gravesite scheduled to be excavated for tomorrow's funeral. It stared down at the ground and then dropped to its knees. Next, it began to claw at the black earth. Jacob and I watched in shock and horror as the thing slowly and methodically dug the grave with his bare, clawed skeleton hands. We watched mesmerized for a long time, until finally Jacob spoke up. Maybe we should call the cops. This is seriously messed up. Without taking my eyes from the screen, I replied. I mean, that grave was scheduled to be dug tonight, and he's doing it. Doesn't it stand to reason the cops already know about this guy? He is the grave digger. Jacob shook his head. No way. No way this is legit. That guy is like a zombie or something. I shrugged, having no idea what to make of it. I can't believe I'm saying this, but yeah, it looks like a real-life zombie. Real dead zombie? You mean, and are you forgetting zombies eat people? I chuckled. Only movie zombies, Jacob. Oh, okay, yeah. You mean real-life zombies are nice, kind old souls. Is that what you're saying? Please. Finally, I put the phone down. I don't know what this is, Jacob, but the city runs both the cemetery and the police department. And when I asked George about this, he acted all weird and secretive about it, and like it was just a well-known fact that graves are dug at night. So whatever this is, I think that the people who run our town already know about it. Jacob frowned deeply. What if it's dangerous? He whispered. I shrugged. I don't know. I don't know what to think. Right now, it looks like it's just doing its job. After some more debate, we decided to put the phone away and sleep on it. The next day, the funeral would happen. The casket lowered into the grave, and the grave would be filled the following night. So we agreed that Jacob would spend the night again Saturday, and we would watch again to see what happened once there was a dead person waiting to be buried. The next morning, I reported for my shift. I gave the fresh grave and the mausoleum a wide berth and hurried to complete my tasks. The place had a whole new air of creepiness about it, and I was interested in getting the heck out. That night, Jacob and I were much more eager to go to sleep early. We fully expected to be woken by the chimes this time, and decided the best way to pass the time would be to sleep until it was zombie time. Plus, we were both exhausted from staying up so long watching the creature the night before. In fact, we named our zombie Clyde. As expected, we were both woken by the soft chime of my phone. This time, Jacob sprang to wakefulness as quickly as I did, and we called up the view of the camera. Clyde must be a creature of habit. He emerged from his strange apartment just as he had the night before. Stiffly and slowly, he made his way to the grave he'd worked so hard to dig the night before. Only then did his routine change. The bony character dropped down into the grave. For a long time, there was nothing else to see. We were almost ready to give up and turn it off when all of a sudden Clyde's bony fingers emerged from the grave and dug into the earth. We watched with fascination and horror as Clyde rose from the grave. He hauled himself out of the earth. But the thing was, Clyde was holding an arm in his hand, and he was eating it. Oh my God, what is he doing? Jacob shrieked, and then we heard some noise from Clyde. He grumbled and moaned as he chewed on the arm. There were wet, sloppy sounds as the raw teeth gnashed between his ancient teeth and snapping sounds as the sinewy flesh broke off the bone. His face was smeared with blood, dirt, and shadows of decay. I had the spinning, pounding rush of blood in my head, watching without believing what was happening. I told you, zombies eat people, Jacob declared, whispering this time. I thought about it for a minute before answering, but at least it's a person who's already dead. Jacob shoved my arm and stared at me, with his mouth hanging open. Are you serious right now? I mean, I get that it's super disgusting, but you have to admit he isn't hurting anybody. I cannot believe what I'm hearing, Jacob muttered. What if it's some sort of deal? Clyde does this admittedly horrible job that nobody wants to do, and in exchange, he gets what he needs. Jacob shook his head. This is the most messed up thing I've ever heard. No, look, hear me out. What if it's like the way it is in every graveyard? Maybe all gravediggers are like Clyde. What if it's normal? Jacob stared at me like he was sort of considering punching me. Jason, you've lost it. We absolutely have to call the cops. I frowned. Do cops even have any authority over creatures who are clearly already dead? I mean, seriously. The graves get dug right on schedule when they need to be dug. Then, like magic, they get covered in whenever someone needs to be buried. Do you think George and the other city people seriously don't know how that happens? Jacob sat back and pushed the phone away, contemplating what I'd said. I mean, it's just like my work there. I hardly ever see George. He just leaves a list on the desk in the office of tasks I need to complete. I wouldn't magically know what to do if no one tells me. Clyde? Well, Clyde seems like he might be even less cognitively inclined than me, so... So what? Jacob interrupted. So, somebody's telling him what to do. Jacob shuddered. Gross. Jacob didn't want to watch anymore, but I did. Clyde went back down into the grave and came out with more pieces of whomever was down there. He trudged his morsels back to the mausoleum home and then came back to methodically fill in the grave in much the same way he dug it. Job well done, Clyde, I whispered. Even though my Clyde theory made good sense, Jacob became obsessed with keeping careful tabs on the grave-digging monster. He downloaded the camera app on his own phone so we could both watch, even if we weren't together. For 2 weeks, Clyde's routine continued the same way. He only emerged at night if there was a grave to be dug. Otherwise, his stone door stayed closed and he didn't come out. He always employed the same methodical and archaic way of digging and covering the graves. He always took parts of the bodies within. It was an unbelievable way to live, but Clyde's routine nonetheless. The problems began when a terrible thing happened in our town. Nobody died for over a month. Obviously, that sounds like it's actually a really good thing to have happened for any community. However, by the middle of the summer, no graves had been dug, and one night the chimes woke me up. I watched with great interest as Clyde came out of the tomb. Even though I knew there was no grave needed, he stumbled out, seeming far less coordinated, his motions more jerky and unstable. He looked around, his head thrashing in quick, panicked turns. I imagined that if Clyde had eyes, he'd be looking around frantically. My phone rang, and it was Jacob. I was able to pick up the call and go back to the screen while talking to him on speaker, thanks to the marvels of modern technology. What's he doing? Jacob asked urgently. No idea, I admitted. Jacob and I silently watched Clyde for a long time. He remained in front of the tomb, looking around frantically with that horrible, eyeless face. Then he leaned his head back and roared. The sound of ancient primal rage. The sound so terrifying that I hurried to shut off the camera. Whoa, what's wrong with him? Jacob said. I didn't want to admit what I was thinking, but I said it anyway. It's been too long since anyone died, Jacob. He's hungry. In the light of day, we couldn't see a way that this was really our problem, or that we should involve ourselves any further by alerting authorities. Plus, we both still agreed that the authorities had to know about this. The problem arose when the girl disappeared the following night. It was an older, teenage girl. In fact, I'd heard of her before, as she just recently graduated from my own high school. Her car was found the morning after she went missing, abandoned alongside the road just outside of town. She'd been coming home late at night from out of town, and presumably her car had run out of gas. Authorities assumed she'd gotten out to walk to town, and from there, they didn't know what happened to her. She could have been picked up, or something could have happened to her once she reached the city limits. There were no leads, but foul play had not been ruled out. The thing was, the night this girl would have gone missing, we were woken by the chimes. We'd watched as Clyde had shoved out of the mausoleum. We'd never seen him move so fast. He loped the opposite direction from the graves, and was soon out of the camera's view. But it was only moments later when Clyde returned, and he was dragging a teenage girl, her body limp and lifeless, her throat ripped open and dripping blood. Oh my God. Jacob had murmured crazily as we sat on the phone together, mesmerized by terror. We both disengaged the camera. We have to call the police now. We have to, Jason. This has gone too far. I raked my hand through the air. I still think there's no way that they don't already know about this. I insisted, look, we can't do anything to help her now. Let's just think this over and talk about it tomorrow. Once news broke about the missing girl the following morning, the whole town was abuzz talking about how another person had once disappeared on that very road back in the 70s. That one had been a jogger in his 40s. Everyone was fascinated by two strange incidents on the same street in one little old small town. Jacob and I were able to do some digging and discovered that when the last victim disappeared, the town had been in another long period of no deaths. The puzzle pieces came together, and we began to see that as long as Clyde stayed fed, he was fine. But if he was hungry, then it wasn't safe to go past the graveyard at night. And for some reason, the higher-ups in our community were letting this happen. Maybe it was a tradition. Maybe it was a pact with the devil. Maybe it was like this everywhere. Maybe it was why you have to hold your breath going past a graveyard at night. If you hold your breath, the zombies don't know you're there. What might happen to a citizen who became aware of this dark conspiracy and attempted to confront the authorities? After all, they were willing to accept the horrible deaths of a middle-aged jogger and a young woman driving at night. In fact, they would need to protect these secrets at all costs. We were suddenly happy we hadn't gone to the police. Well, don't hate me for this, Jacob, but he got what he needed. Maybe it'll be fine. People here can't stay alive forever. People will start dying again, and Clyde will go back to normal. Jacob looked at me like I was insane. At the same time, he couldn't argue with my logic. What could we do? The problem was the ban on death continued. People were apparently going through some weird, super healthy, super careful streak in our town, and nobody died. Another 6 weeks passed and brought us into the fall without a single death. Then we were woken one night by the chimes. Just as he'd done the night of the unfortunate girl, Clyde came out of the mausoleum just to wish for a grave scream at the moon. We have to stop him, Jacob said urgently when he showed up on my doorstep by 6 a.m. the following morning. If anybody goes by there, he's going to kill him. What are we supposed to do? We can't know when someone will go by. If we get woken up by the chimes, it'll be too late for us to get there and warn the person. We have to be the people that go by. We'll know he's coming, and we'll cut off his head. Are you crazy? I demanded. He's just some decayed old dirtbag, Jason. We can do it. Jacob and I got into a big fight about this. In the end, he agreed to give up the idea, or I threatened to go to the police after all, and we were both more scared of that idea than we were of Clyde. So we laid the whole thing to rest, barely speaking over it, and simply prayed someone would soon die of natural causes. But 3 nights later, I was awoken by the chimes. I sat bolt upright, instantly awake, and filled with a bottomless sense of dread. Despite the fact that I'd initially thought we wouldn't be able to help whomever stumbled into Clyde's domain, I was driven by the urgent feeling to try. I only lived 5 blocks from the cemetery, and someone was about to die. I had to try. I didn't even touch my phone, just leapt from my bed and ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they'd explode, but didn't slow at all. Within a half block, I could see who was standing before the black iron fence to the graveyard. It was Jacob. He seemed frozen to a spot. Clyde was tearing through the grass and the graves, covering an alarming amount of ground. And Jacob looked absolutely paralyzed by fear. Whatever he planned for this big heroic mission had been overridden by terror in the presence of the gravedigger. Oh my God, hold your breath, I said, trying to pick up my frantic pace. I was moving faster than Clyde, but Clyde had a lot less ground to cover to reach Jacob. Hold your breath, Jacob, hold your breath. I screamed as my feet continued to pound the pavement. I was almost to my friend by the time my demand had left my lips. Snapped out of his trance by my voice, Jacob slowly turned his head to look at me. I got to him just as Clyde reached through the fence. My fingertips grazed Jacob's sleeve, even as Clyde yanked him brutally into the bars without a second hesitation. Clyde ripped out Jacob's throat with his teeth. I stared in horror as the life drained from my friend. Somewhere in my mind, I heard my mother's voice then. Jason, hold your breath. But the words did not compute as I gulped in desperate breaths of air. Clyde's face snapped up. If he'd had eyes, they would have been trained on me. He released Jacob, and my dead friend slid sloppily to the ground. Clyde began to amble clumsily toward the opening in the gate, which was merely 10 feet away. He would soon get out of the graveyard, and I had no weapon with me. Hot tears streaming down my cheeks. I finally collected myself enough to suck in a giant breath of air into my lungs and hold it there. Clyde stopped in his tracks. His head with a dead empty eye socket stayed trained in my direction for just a second. Then he turned and ambled back toward Jacob's fallen body. I turned and I ran. Days later, after Jacob's horribly sad funeral, when my family had returned home, I walked into the kitchen where my mother was making coffee. "Mom?" I asked. She turned and gave me a sad smile. "Do you remember how you always said to hold your breath when you pass a cemetery?" Mom's pretty face fell. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. I whispered, "Do you know the story behind that superstition?" Her eyes darkened, and it seemed a shadow fell across her face. "No, sweetie," she said softly. "Just an old superstition." She was lying. I could see it. She knew the truth. We moved away not long after that. We stuck around just long enough for my parents to find a place for us to go. A place that wasn't anywhere near a graveyard. They call it the Dead Stretch. The grizzled old timer on the stool beside me in the diner set a sun-beaten John Deere cap pitched slightly on his whiskered head. He punctuated this with a slurp of coffee, which he drank like a dog takes water, lifting the steaming mug to his lips for his tongue to dart in and out like a shriveled worm, helping the Java into his leathery mouth. It was late. Too late to give a shit about the time, but well past dark. The diner's wraparound windows framed a wide lot bathed in the black of night and a drift of snow. Only by the glow of the truck stop's neon light, the night owl refuel your tankers and your coffee cups, and the headlights of long haulers pulling in and out. I thank God for all-night truck stops. The coffee tasted like cat piss and the eggs weren't much better, but it was a glorious break from the endless hours corralling 80,000 pounds of long-haul trucks across the country. The Dead Stretch? I asked, puzzled. I'd driven plenty of roads, most of them as empty and treacherous as my ex-wife, and they bore all manner of strange names taken from trucker colloquialism. But I had never heard of anything called the Dead Stretch. Yep, the old-timer said through a mouthful of eggs. Cuts through the Ozarks like a good whore through a weak marriage. Empty road. From 45-50 miles. Just you and your hula girl in those mean woods far as the eye can see. But you keep aware and you'll get through with no damage. My usual route, a busy interstate which cut a fairly straight line across the state, was caught in a nasty blight of road work, deterring all would-be travelers elsewhere. I'd scoured my glove box map for an alternative route, which wouldn't cost me more than an hour. That's when I found a little vein of RD. Snaking through the Ozark Mountains, a shortcut which would surprisingly save me time. Not sure how I'd never noticed it on the map before when I asked the fellow sitting next to me at the diner if he'd ever done it. He cocked an eyebrow and told me its unofficial title. Why do they call it that? I questioned, avoiding using its nickname. I didn't like how it felt on my tongue, like the words were squirming insects scraping to get out. The Dead Stretch. Just one of those things. There's talk, sure. Always talk about a place like this. You hear rumors, guys seeing something strange, hearing something strange. No other cars around. He's bound to see something, just to make the time pass quicker. I guess it was taken from John Hattinger. He was a drunk and hit a patch of black ice one night. Jackknifed it straight off the road, wrapped the nose of his bed bugger around a tree. They never found his body. Say he just blew right through the windshield. I shuddered at the thought, not only of shooting my truck off flat ground and blasting through the windshield like a rocket ship, but of driving a lone stretch of mountains with only ugly Missouri woods for company. You do best to find another route, Squirt. This time of year, frost, snow, and a hell of a dark breed accidents like rabbits do more rabbits. The old-timer said with a smirk, his crooked smile filled with yellow mush. I had to get going. I could feel exhaustion's warm blanket settling in over my shoulders, and if I didn't leave this stool, I was afraid my tired ass would melt right into it, gluing me in place. I hesitated, not sure how to ask, not sure how to admit to myself and him that his word of warning had gotten to me. Do you know any other way? He grinned. Sure do, Sonny. After the old timer gave me directions, I stepped out into the chill and pulled out my cell. Surprised to see it was only 10:30. My little girl was a night owl like me and would still be up, so I gave her a ring. There was no doubt my ex-wife would blame me for keeping her awake, but the sound of my 9-year-old daughter's voice was worth the cost of admission. Daddy. Her voice filled my ear. I felt a smile pinching at my ears. Hey, weirdo, I said. She giggled. What are you still doing? Just reading my book. What book? Harry Potter, she said in a burst. Oh, you learn anything at school today? Bunch of nothing, she said. Well, that's why you got books, ain't it? Hey, those boys are still giving you trouble. I could sense her hesitation on the line. Honey, you tell me if you're getting crap, and I'll come to class and whoop some ass. Just say the word, honey. I'm there. I'm okay, I swear. All right, I said. And then I heard the murmured voice of my ex interrogating my daughter on who she was talking to. She said Daddy, which brought my ex-wife no great pleasure. Honey, you there? She needs to go to bed, Carl. My ex-wife's derisive tone was not one of the things I missed about our marriage. 5 more minutes. No, I'll tell her you said goodnight. There was a click as the line went dead. I cursed and kicked snow. I should have pressed harder. Should have done more after all that's happened. I wish I'd just gone to say goodbye to my little girl. 20 minutes later, I was on a road, a 6-lane highway with sparse traffic rolling beneath my feet. The great beast of my truck humming gently as it carried me up the safer road the old timer had recommended. I was making decent time and was ultimately glad I'd heeded his advice and avoided the dead stretch. I was an hour or 2 behind, but I always valued my safety over time. Speeding was never worth sparing some change on your clock. I felt good, tired, but good. Then I saw the flares, little beads of light burning through the haze of snow, spiraling down out of the black heavens. As I drew closer, I saw the extent of the damage. The flares drew a crude outline around an ancient pine tree laid across the road. This massive obstruction blocked all 6 lanes of traffic, a snarl of roots dangling from one end, a spread of pine branches from the other. There was a state trooper in his cruiser directing people to turn back, and when I asked, he told me the road crews wouldn't be able to clear it out until morning. I was screwed, late, tired and screwed. And there I sat, cursing God's name as I flipped back the way I'd come from, back toward the road that would take me up the dead stretch. The dead stretch was a narrow strip of 2-lane blacktop, slick with ice, which carved a path through the rocky, wooded Ozark Mountains. It rose at a steep incline, carrying me up into the mountains and toward my destination. I eased back on the gas, remembering the old-timer story about that guy who wrapped his truck around a tree and drove with both hands firmly on the wheel. There was no other traffic. I was totally alone. And then I wasn't. I saw the first shape about 12 miles up the road. I'm not sure of altitude, but I was high up. The road curved here and there to accommodate the craggy landscape, and a high-visibility metal retainer ran along the lane, my lane, which stretched along a sheer drop. The snow had thickened well on its way to becoming a full-blown blizzard, and my visibility was shrinking to the 15-foot cone of light. My brights lanced ahead. I was approaching one of those curves in the road when I saw it, the road, which was planning to take a harsh left just ahead, ended abruptly in a collage of high-visibility warning signs telling me to turn. I had plenty of time to make the curve and had eased the gas even further back, slowing to a crawl. When I saw the spider-like shape skitter over the reflective signs, it was lithe and quick, moving on a multitude of stick-like jagged limbs which carried its furry brown body like a monkey from here to there in the blink of an eye. My headlights caught its eyes, and they glowed, and then it was gone, slithering over the signs and disappearing down the face of the cliff. My heart shot into the red line, thudding in my chest like a racehorse. I could feel my throat tightening, could feel fear squeezing my heart in its icy grip. My truck was still shooting forward, straight towards the edge of a cliff, and the thing I'd seen. I pumped the brakes in time, skidding safely to a stop. Without the thrum of my engine, the howl of the wind tightened, beating in on the sides of my cab with a frozen fist as I sat there, knuckles white, hands wringing the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just seen. No, I certainly hadn't seen anything. It was late, it was dark, and I was riding on empty with only cat piss coffee to keep me. There was a thump. The sound came from the roof of my cab, hollow and powerful, like something just landed above me. I waited and I didn't hear another sound. As fear loosened its grip on my heart, I began to realize I heard scratching, razor-sharp nails scraping and clicking their way across the roof. Slow, deliberate, making their way towards my windshield. I couldn't move. The scraping was getting closer, louder. And then a raccoon, fat and fluffy, slid down the windshield and waddled off the hood of my truck, its tiny nails clicking and clacking as it went. It plunked down into the snow and wandered off into the night, leaving me feeling slightly idiotic. I looked around, wondering where it could have come from, and then something burst through the passenger window. I was showered in glass, and this thing lunged for my throat. I instinctively jerked away as its gangly, sloth-like arm swung for my jugular with huge, hooked claws. It was snarling, shrieking. It resembled a spider melded with a cave-dwelling bat, and it was as big as a man. The only thing that saved me is that it couldn't fit through the window. It slashed at the passenger seat and severed the radio, my only chance to call for help. I still had a phone, but experience told me there'd be no signal out here. The image of my daughter suddenly flashed across my mind, and I howled and kicked. I kicked for my life. The powerful soles of my work boots pounded down on the spider bat with all the fury I could muster. The monster screamed and began slashing at my legs. One of those hooked claws caught my thigh and tore flesh from bone. It was my turn to scream. I kicked harder and harder, channeling everything into my feet, fighting through the agony as I booted for everything I was worth. I kicked and heard a sickening crunch, like stepping on broken glass as the spider bat's face crumpled inward. The creature howled and withdrew into the storm, its hateful face glistening with black blood, its eyes bright as it faded off into the swirling white noise. I threw my truck in gear and eased off down the road. I hit the turn as my speed picked up, slowly and surely urging my mechanical beast into a gallop. I fumbled out the map, unfurling it over the wheel, while I split my attention between the road ahead and trying to pinpoint exactly where I was on the map. I looked down at my leg and immediately regretted it. It was bad. I located myself on the map, and I realized I was only a quarter of the way through the dead stretch, and I was quickly approaching what truckers sometimes call a hole in the wall. I was approaching a tunnel. As I got closer, I heard another shriek, and then another and another. Soon, I could hear dozens of them, like a band of wolves, and they were calling for me. As I approached the tunnel, which bored a 2-lane hole through the center of a tremendous mountain, I heard the shrieks getting closer. The denizens of the dead stretch were coming for me. I began to see them in my side mirrors, shapes too many to count, racing along in an attempt to match speed with my truck, and they were gaining on me, scores of them, like a thick stream of ants. I plowed forward up the road. The needle of my speedometer was steadily climbing from 30 to 40 to 50 as I raced toward the mouth of the tunnel. The blizzard was worsening. I had a sinking suspicion that I was still driving in an incline, rising higher into the mountains, into the dead stretch with every passing second. Blizzards were always worse higher up. The snow had become a churning wall of white that engulfed my world, snapping around with the fury of God. The gale-force wind was screaming. The bad conditions were made worse, much worse by my rising panic and the horde of beasts chasing me with their cries. My visibility was shrinking every second. My headlights were being blotted out by the storm. I shouldn't have been able to see the tunnel entrance through the thickening storm, but I did. I could. It loomed ahead like a pair of open jaws, and then I was inside it. I drove and never looked back. The shrieks receded into the distance before fading into the wind completely. As I continued, I noticed the things had refused to join me in the inky blackness of the tunnel. I should have stopped to wonder why. It was pitch black in that tunnel. I eased back on the gas. My headlights lanced the road ahead, illuminating 2 lanes of cracked and used asphalt, bumpy, abused, long forgotten by the world. There were raw stone walls, and the ceiling. Well, I couldn't see the ceiling. I knew it wasn't low. Andy wondered if there was a ceiling at all. I had a dreadful feeling that I was driving beneath a great abyss. The noise had died down, the creature's shrieks had stopped, and the wind had taken a muffler, suffocated into a distant drone by the tunnel. The familiar hum of my truck's engine was a comfort. The cold was bad, but I didn't feel it. I thought I was home free, and then I nearly crashed. The pickup came rushing out of the darkness. I slammed the brakes and went screeching to a stop just in time, the nose of my truck coming to rest softly on the bumper of the ruined car that blocked my way. It was painted an ugly crimson that had been frosted over completely. It looked like it had been there since the beginning of time. I could see claw marks on the car. The windows were blown out and my headlights illuminated an empty interior. Icicles dangled from the ceiling like daggers. The seating was torn to shreds. None of that gave me much concern. What did, however, was the fact that I was no longer moving. I hesitated for an instant before I eased on the gas and began to push the pickup forward, trying to ease it out of my way. It was a terrible idea. As I urged the pickup forward, it began to shift sideways, both bumpers scraping the walls as it turned at a parallel until it came to rest sitting horizontally over both lanes of traffic. It was stuck, wedged between the walls of the tunnel, completely unmoving. I stopped and just sat there, coming to terms with what this meant. It meant that in order to move, I'd have to get out of my truck, secure the pickup to my winch, and reverse until it was dislodged and out of the way. I figured I'd also have to detach my trailer. It would only slow me down and make my journey that much harder. Shit, I realized my leg was still bleeding. I hadn't severed an artery. If I had, I'd be dead already, but it was a nasty wound, and I took a moment to cinch it tight with my belt. I felt a flash of pain and grunted, then a warm numbness settled in as the blood loss slowed. I looked back at the pickup, hesitating at the idea of abandoning the safety of my truck for the cold darkness of the tunnel. There was no point in putting this off any longer. I grabbed a flashlight and tire iron, and I stepped out of my truck. The first thing I did was angle my flashlight skyward. I was right. There was no ceiling. The tunnel walls stretched up maybe 20 feet before opening into a vast cavern. I couldn't tell you how big or small the space was. My flashlight beam melted out of existence, not finding any ceiling or walls beyond the ones to my sides. I shuddered, feeling the distant but familiar terror of a child, small and tormented by the dark. In the belly of a mountain, I forced myself into motion. In 10 minutes, the pickup was out of my way. I made tracks to my trailer, meaning to detach it, and that's when I heard the noise, a chittering, like the raspy, fluttering sound of cicadas. I paused, and it stopped. And then I heard it again. It was coming from above me. It was echoing, fading off into silence like before. I swung my light upwards, and it took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was stars spread out across a cloudless night sky. But it wasn't. It was glowing, hundreds of them. Yellow, unblinking eyes spattered across the darkness like pinpricks of light. And then they blinked in unison and chittered. Terror turned my legs to jelly at the realization that there were not many creatures with many eyes staring down at me. It was one creature, one incredible beast that inhabited the hollowed cavern of this great mountain. I had to get out of here. Right now. My trembling hand reached for the pin that would uncouple my trailer. And that's when the tentacles shot out of the darkness above me. I ripped the pin free, releasing the trailer from my cab as a dozen tentacles, black and scaly, lanced down out of the abyss like coiled snakes snapping on their prey. They were as thick as tree branches, tipped with a sunken mouth of needle-sharp teeth. I realized the eyes were inside the mouse, sitting at the end of some awful esophagus, and then I screamed, batting away one as it shot towards me. I lunged for the driver's side door, and I felt my feet go out from under me. I was barely able to pull myself up and into the cab. I slammed the door and keyed the ignition, and I floored the gas. The tentacles were everywhere. It was like being caught in a hailstorm, the helpless feeling of being under assault from the sky. My truck picked up speed as I scraped by the pickup, tentacles rocking and swaying my vehicle as I gunned it. I could see the end of the tunnel now, but those things were trying to capsize me. I eased the wheel to the right, pulling my truck as close to the rocky wall as I dared. I listened with a sort of satisfaction as the tentacles were torn away by the wall, and I could hear them shriek in pain. And then I shot out of the tunnel. I eyed the side mirror, and I saw a mass of tentacles lash out after me before withdrawing back into the deep darkness of their home. The blizzard had parted like a curtain, revealing the moonscape I now found myself in. I was trucking through a narrow valley, carved through a rocky wood. Ugly trees, drenched in frost, pressed in like bookends. Beyond them, two great mountains spread like wings of rock up into the sky on either side of me. I was high up. I could make out the mountain's peaks, dusted in clouds, and could tell that my altitude had risen substantially. The road had become a bumpy one-lane crusted in ice. I doubted very much if it was even a road at all. It went on like that for some time, and then the road forked unexpectedly. It split to the right through a narrow pass, and I saw a set of tracks in the snow, huge footprints dwindling off that way. The indentations conjured up images of a huge beast wading through a blizzard. What the hell could have made those? I thought to myself. To the left, the road continued on to an ancient bridge, steel and wood warped by weather, extending a finger of land across a vast cavern. I went left toward the bridge, figuring it was a better bet. Bridge meant humanity. Humanity meant finding my way home. But as I drew closer, I saw the floor of the bridge had collapsed long ago. It was completely impassable. I slowed my truck to a crawl and then a stop, and I sat there. It was cold. I was shivering, and after a while, I threw my truck in reverse and I went back towards the narrow pass and whatever had made those footprints. After the spider bats and the beast in the mountain, the last thing I expected to find in the dead stretch was a cabin. I'd been headed up the narrow pass for a long while, certain I'd get stuck. Rocky Canyon walls eased in on either side, and there were a few points where I found myself very close to grading to a stop. I thought about those massive footprints I'd seen leading this way, and wondered what might come next. Surely something to rival the awfulness I'd encountered before. Surely something that would end me once and for all. But no. My truck crunched out of the narrow canyon, and I found myself at the base of a naked, snow-covered hill. This bore none of the ugly landmarks that had come before. It was a smooth mound of unblemished powder supporting the biggest log cabin I'd ever seen. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and I could see firelight through the windows. Warm, I thought, and I nearly cried with joy. I don't remember driving up the hill, nor staggering from my truck and collapsing at the cabin's front door. But as soft curtains of darkness closed over my vision, I found myself curled up on a welcome mat the size of a dining table. It read, "Freeze to meet you." I remember thinking that was silly before darkness swallowed me, and I thought no more. Warmth was a strange feeling. I'd awoken in the cabin, my leg bandaged, and for a terrible moment I felt like Alice after taking the drink-me potion. The world around me was far too large. The cabin, too big for any human, was barren, lopsided, and built from hand. I was on a massive, moldering couch in the main room, which was sparse and had little in the way of landmarks. There was a kitchen table and stew frothing in a dented pot over the raging flames of the hearth. There was a dark hallway which split off towards the bedrooms. I only glanced over at these for a moment because the biggest man in the world was sitting across from me. He must have stood, my God, 11 feet tall, built like an old circus strongman with a head of wild white hair. His cheeks were rugged and snow-whipped, and frizzy white mutton chops shot out at weird angles from a face cut from granite. Big tufts of coarse, snowy hair sprouted from the cuffs of his patchwork flannel, which produced thick hands the size of catcher's mitts. There was only one thing I thought to ask. "Are you Santa Claus?" For a second I thought he might have been. "No," he answered. "I'm a Yeti." He could have been a man when he spoke. It was slow and deliberate, and I saw big square teeth, except for the canines which were hooked fangs, tucked into fat pink gums. He moved deftly, which was oddly unbefitting of a man of his size, of a thing of his size, rather. And then he poured me a bowl of the best tasting stew I'd ever had, and he sat down and we talked. "What? What is this?" "This is delicious," I said, swallowing a mouthful of the thick, hot stew. "Snow elk stew," he replied. "They come through in herds, fewer and fewer." And then he told me the history of his people, and I listened in silence as he spoke of the village of Yetis who'd once ruled this side of the mountain, and how they were no more, all gone now. He said, "I'm the last, and soon I will join them, frozen bones entombed in ice." I asked him of the creatures I'd encountered, and for the first time he seemed to tense up, giving a vague reply. I asked for his name. You couldn't pronounce it, he said. He didn't ask for mine. We talked more, and something felt off. The air was stale and ripe, and it gave the impression of death nearby. He was aloof, and at first I attributed that to his nature. But the longer we spoke, the more I suspected he was hiding something. So what? What happened to the other Yetis? I asked between spoonfuls of stew, chewing the cubes of meat thoughtfully, savoring the flavor of the snow elk, which was sweet and somehow reminded me of chicken. Long story. He said, rising. Bathroom first, stories after. He hurried to the front door and disappeared outside for the outhouse. And then I was alone. I was suddenly aware of every sound, the thin whistle of wind outside, the crackle of warmth in the fire, floorboards creaking from the other room. Was there someone else in the cabin? I slowly rose and moved into the hallway, which ended in doors on either side. I heard the creaking again. It came from the one on the left. I moved slowly. My hand reached out, shaking slightly, as it eased open the left side door. And then the smell hit me, a hot stench of rot, thick and suffocating. I coughed, and a great cloud of frost plumed from my lips, obscuring my field of view. When it cleared, I saw meat 24 skin slabs dangled from meat hooks, all muscle and fat and bone, dripping blood which pooled in a sticky layer on the floor. There were several animals, some of which I couldn't identify. But 6 or 7 of them were humans, men and women, skinned, butchered, and hanging. Some of their bodies were moldy, old, and shriveled, like meat forgotten in the back of a fridge. I saw a man missing his thigh and left arm, a woman with no head, and I felt the human being's stew churn in my stomach. And then a huge shadow swallowed me. I would have let you go, the Yeti said, the air turning hot as he moved closer. I had enough last winter. I turned to look at him and was met with the back of his hand. I crumbled into darkness before I could even scream. I was floating when I woke up, and my shoulder was on fire. There was a meat hook driven through it, and I was dangling with the corpses of those who'd come before me. The steady throb of my flesh, with cold metal barb forced through it, was unbearable. I bit my tongue so I wouldn't scream. I squeezed my eyes clear, and I looked around. The room was cramped and square, and through the human ornaments, I could see part of a grimy butcher's block against one wall. A cleaver, with a blade the size of a laptop computer, was jutting up from the wood. The blade was scarred and rusted, and I wondered how it would feel sawing through my neck. I felt my stomach churn, and I remembered the human stew who I had so cheerfully gobbled up earlier. I wondered if this would be my tomb. And then a thought occurred. I looked up. I saw icicles dangling from waterlogged rafters and hooks bolted to the ceiling from which the meat hooks hung, their eyelets threaded through the little rusted fingers secured to the wood. Meat hooks on hooks, I thought and grimaced. Then I saw something that gave my heart a little flutter of hope. There was an empty meat hook off to my right, hanging unburdened in the frosty air. If I could reach it, maybe I could unlock it from the ceiling. It would make a meager weapon, but any weapon was better than none. I reached for it and felt my shoulder sizzle, and then I reached further and bit down as my shoulder began to burn. My fingertips grazed the edge of the hook, and I reached further, but no, I wasn't going to be able to reach it. The only way was if I could build momentum like a kid on a swing, going up and up to get it. I was summoning the nerve to try when I heard something that made my stomach drop footsteps. I didn't think I swung for the meat hook. The pain was incredible now, and the footsteps were getting closer. I swung with everything I had and I grabbed it, and then quickly concealed it behind my back. The Yeti lumbered in just as I was steadying myself on the body beside me. He paused and looked up at me, and just when I thought I'd been caught, I saw there was sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, and moved over to the butcher's block. He pried the cleaver free. My palm was sweating, and I tightened my grip on the meat hook held behind my back. "Please, I have a daughter." "So did I," he said. "So did I." He waded through the hanging bodies and stood before me. "Can't you?" I choked on my emotion, hot tears sliding down my face. "It'll be quick." He raised the cleaver. I inhaled, and the world shot into clarity. I roared, and the Yeti paused stunned. The meat hook in my hand came down with more force than I ever knew was in me. He looked over at the surge of movement, and the tip of the meat hook went burrowing through his eye with a wet crackle. His cleaver fell to the floor. He looked up at me with his good eye, the meat hook jutting from his skull. Blood bubbled from his eye socket. The lights in his head dimmed, and slowly he tumbled forward. I don't want to relive the hour I spent forcing my body off the meat hook, and so I'll spare myself and only tell you what came next. I found my truck where I'd left it out front, with the key still in the ignition. When the engine coughed to life, I tried not to cry, and then I drove. I drove and never looked back. The world around me was white and pure and smooth. It was a snow-drenched moonscape. There were no mountains or trees or rolling hills. The sky was pure and black, with only an icy moon to cast my world in silver. I drove this way for a while, and then the highway came just like that. 2 lanes of smooth asphalt began in snow and didn't end until I found myself on the other side of the dead stretch. The landscape changed slowly, growing trees, mountains, and the twinkling lights of towns. I didn't see any of it. My hands were frozen to the wheel. My eyes were frozen on the road, and I was covered in my own blood. I must have blacked out. I woke up in heaven, a sterile, white heaven. It was a hospital room. But as a man who'd lived through what I had, it might as well have been heaven. It's been a long and painful recovery. My leg aches day and night. My mind does too. I still dream about the dead stretch. I can only hope that time slowly burns that away, like a night fog under the first light of dawn. But I made it through, and I got to see my daughter's face again. She visited me today. We did coloring books, and I hugged her tight, never wanting to let go.